Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Nate Hall. I'm 31 years old. This happened in September of 2023 during a trip that was supposed to last a month in the Sawtooth Wilderness of Idaho. I was never the type of person who liked big crowds. Even as a kid, I avoided large family gatherings, slipped away to my room, or walked off by myself in the woods behind our house. Over time, that sense of solitude became soothing, like it was the only place I could hear myself think. By my late 20s, however, my avoidance had consequences. I lost friends because I'd never show up to events. My girlfriend grew distant because she found me emotionally cold, and I drifted into a kind of anxious numbness. By the beginning of 2023, I felt my life had started to unravel. My hours at the warehouse were cut. I'd taken a blow to my finances, and the same month, Kaylee, my girlfriend of 6 years, packed her bags and left, telling me I was lost. After that, I was done listening to people. I decided I needed a hard reset. I'd heard about extended wilderness stays, something about sleeping under open skies for an extended period, alone in pristine nature, was supposed to help you find meaning, or at least a sense of clarity. My dog, Scout, had been my silent companion for 6 years, and I couldn't imagine leaving him behind. He was a 6-year-old black lab, full of spirit, always with that dog smile on his face, and if anyone loved the outdoors more than me, it was him. So, when the weather cooled in early September, I loaded my truck with camping gear, food, water filters, the best boots I could afford, a warm sleeping bag, and set out for Sawtooth Lake. I'd never traveled deep into the Sawtooths before. I'd done a few day hikes, but never more. Still, I'd read everything I could about the trails, studied maps, and spent a hefty sum on a rugged smartphone with offline GPS. That month, the plan was to stay near the lake for about 30 days, practice some bushcraft, maybe fish or forage, journal about my feelings, and come home a calmer, stronger person. That was the plan. Sawtooth Lake is high in the mountains, accessible by a trail that's a bit steep for novices but not impossible. I parked at the Iron Creek trailhead, hoisted my big backpack, got a Scout on his leash, and started the climb. It took us most of the day, stopping for water breaks, to finally reach the lake, and the moment we arrived, I had to pause at the shoreline and take it all in. Towering peaks loomed overhead, reflected in the shimmering water so perfectly it looked like a painted mirror. The air felt crisp, a faint pine scent swirling around us, and it was quiet. No hum of cars or crowds, just the distant whisper of wind through the pines. Scout was beyond ecstatic. He sniffed every tree within range, splashed by the water's edge, and demanded a game of fetch. I pitched my tent on a patch of flat earth a few dozen yards from the lake, set down my gear, and started a small campfire to boil water for dinner. I remember having this fleeting moment of absolute peace, the sense that I was exactly where I needed to be. And though the nights were cold at a high elevation, I had good gear, so I felt confident. I kept telling myself, "This is it, Nate. You're finally doing something that matters to you." For once, I wasn't trying to please a boss or keep Kaylee's attention. I was out here to get my mind right, to reflect, to heal. I remember that night well, how the sky lit up with stars so thick it felt like a painting. Scout crawled into my tent, curled up at my feet, and was asleep in minutes. I took one last look at the moon on the lake, wrote a few notes in my journal, and drifted off feeling hopeful. The second day, little things began to go wrong. My phone, supposedly fully charged from the car's adapter, registered at 30%. It struck me as strange. I'd left it off during the hike up and only turned it on briefly to check GPS. I shrugged it off. Battery drain happens in colder weather sometimes. Then my watch stopped ticking around noon, just froze at 12:14. It was a cheap watch I'd owned for years, so I figured the battery died. That same afternoon, as Scout and I walked around the far side of the lake, I tried to match the trail we were on with the topographical lines on my map, but it didn't match. The path seemed to curve northeast, but the map insisted it curved northwest. I tried my compass. The needle spun halfway around, then stopped about 30 degrees shy of north. I tapped it, thinking maybe something was messing with it. The needle jolted, then drifted lazily in a circle, like it was searching for a magnetic field that wasn't there. Scout's mood changed a bit around day 3. He started growling at random times, specifically in the mornings, staring at the lake. Usually he was an unflappable dog, friendly and calm, but I noticed his hackles raised more often. If I tried to get his attention, he'd just look up at me, ears half back, as if he was confused about something. One morning, I woke to find my sleeping bag unzipped from the inside. This was weird because I generally sleep like a log, and whenever I do wake up at night to pee, I'm painfully aware of the cold. I zipped the bag right back up. But that morning, the entire thing lay open, and I was shivering. Scout was outside the tent, pacing. The door was closed, but not zipped. It was as if he'd opened it from the inside somehow, but that didn't make sense. I sat there, half groggy, trying to figure out if I'd walked in my sleep. My journal was still beside me, though it had been moved from where I left it. Pages were slightly crumpled, but it was still there. No footprints in the dirt besides my own. The ground was soft enough that if someone else had come in, I'd have seen another set of tracks. It was deeply unnerving. That same night, my campfire refused to stay lit. I'd get the flames going, and they'd burn normally for a minute. Then, without warning, the flames would sputter and die, leaving glowing embers that would hiss and spark. Dry wood acted wet, but it was the same bundle of timber I'd collected earlier that day. Something about it felt off, like it wasn't burning at a temperature I recognized. Finally, I placed a small piece of paper inside to keep the flame going. It flared orange, then burned greenish-blue for a second, then died. It was the strangest thing, and I couldn't explain it. I gave up on a big fire that night. I boiled water over a tiny flicker, ate quickly, and got in my tent. Scout whined, pawing at the ground outside, but eventually settled. I told myself these were just random anomalies. After all, nature can be unpredictable, and I was new to extended stays in truly remote terrain. On day 5, I had the first run-in with another human being, a hiker named Jake Merton. I remember it vividly because I was collecting water from the lake, and Scout started growling at something behind me. When I turned, I saw a man about my height, wearing a dusty old backpack, walking toward me with an easy, friendly wave. He had light brown hair, neatly trimmed, a short beard, and bright hazel eyes. He wore a wide grin. I noticed that even though the ground was uneven, he walked without making a sound. He introduced himself politely. "Hey, buddy, name's Jake. Didn't expect to see anyone this far off season." He smiled down at Scout. He doesn't look too happy to see me, though. I apologized for the growling and corrected Scout with a firm no. Scout quieted, but still eyed Jake warily. Usually my dog loved people, so that alone made me cautious. Still, I was glad to see someone else. Jake asked if I'd been camping long. I said about 5 days. We chatted about how stunning the area was, and he mentioned he came up here every year, usually in August, but got delayed this season. "What brings you up here for so long?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. I gave him the short version. Needed a break from life, Wanted to clear my head? Jake nodded, face empathetic. Makes sense, he replied. Place like this, it helps you find clarity. He paused, looking around the tree line. Sometimes, though, it doesn't let things go. I remember thinking that last comment was strange, but I chalked it up to maybe him just waxing poetic. Jake had a slight tension in his face when he said it, like he was remembering something unpleasant, but that tension vanished almost immediately. He offered me some coffee from a small thermos. I politely declined. We ended up walking around the lake together, or at least on the main trail that skirted the shore, as he told me about some scenic viewpoints. I asked if he had a phone or device that was still charged. Jake looked confused for a moment, patted his pockets and shook his head. I just carry maps, buddy, old school style. He patted the side of his pack. They're a bit worn, but they work. I glanced up at the sky, noticed it was nearing midday, then looked down at my motionless watch that still read 12:14. I asked him for the time. He blinked oddly. Didn't I tell you it's 9:22 right now? Morning? That's not possible, I said, pointing to the height of the sun. It was definitely closer to noon, but he just shrugged and repeated 9:22 with another quick grin. Up here, time can be funny, he added. Don't sweat it. There was something off about him. I figured maybe he had an older GPS or some kind of watch that was malfunctioning, or maybe he was messing with me. Still, he seemed friendly enough. After we circled back to my campsite, he said he was going to continue on. We parted ways. Scout kept staring after him, ears back. The rest of that day was quiet, but I felt uneasy. That evening, the breeze across the lake sounded almost like someone humming, low and distant. When I tried to start my campfire again, it sparked, then burst into a bright green flame for a few seconds before turning normal and steady. I felt relief. At least I had a fire. Scout calmed a bit and lay by my feet. Then, out of nowhere, Jake reappeared. He stepped into the camp circle so silently that Scout didn't even notice at first. I nearly jumped out of my skin when he said, "Mind if I sit?" He wore the same clothes as earlier, no sign of gear or sleeping bag, just that dusty backpack. He claimed to have been camping nearby. He didn't say where or how. He looked around the clearing, nodding as if he were a guest in my living room. "Thanks," he said, smiling. "I always appreciate good company." I tried to be hospitable, offering some coffee I'd brewed in my little camp kettle. He took it, drank, then stared into the flames. A hint of sorrow flickered across his face as the firelight danced on it. For a while, we didn't speak. Finally, he said something strange. "Have you seen anyone else up here? Anyone who shouldn't be?" I furrowed my brow. "No, it's just been me and Scout so far. Saw a deer or two, but no people besides you. Why?" "Just checking," he replied, eyes far away. Then he smiled in that too bright way. "You know, I used to come here with a friend. Name was Elias Crane. He never liked me talking about him, but I just can't help it sometimes." Something in his tone chilled me. It was like he was dredging up a memory half buried in guilt. I didn't want to pry too much, so I nodded, said something vague like, "Oh yeah," and tried to shift the conversation. We talked about fishing, about how I planned to stick around for a month. He nodded, as though he admired my decision, but said little else. Then he stood up abruptly. "I'm going to gather some wood, help keep that fire going," he said. "Thanks, man," I said, though I had plenty of wood ready in a pile. "I've actually got enough over there." But Jake had already disappeared into the darkness beyond the glow of the flames, steps eerily silent on the pine needles. I waited. 15 minutes passed, then 30. I called out his name. No response. Maybe he'd decided to leave. The tension in the air made me uneasy, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just a weird guy, or maybe he needed space. Eventually, I zipped up the tent, lulled by the fire's warmth, and drifted off with Scout curled at my feet again. That night, I slept deeply until a loud splash yanked me out of a dream. Scout was barking like someone was attacking him. I unzipped the tent, stumbling outside in my thermal shirt and boxers. The fire was out, no embers, no smoke, and I was certain I'd left it smoldering. The moon was high, reflecting on the still water. Something had definitely splashed, but the lake surface was now mirror calm. "Scout?" I called. He was sniffing at the shore, hackles raised, barking in short, sharp bursts. I walked up to him and noticed he was soaked around his legs, as if he'd run into the water. Then my flashlight flickered and I glimpsed footprints. They led out of the lake, up the shore toward the trees. Bare footprints, definitely human, trailing water and some kind of dark, oily residue. I called out again, "Jake?" No response. My heart hammered. Was I seeing some weird trick of the light? I decided I should probably check it out. So I followed the footprints a few yards until they abruptly stopped beneath a pine. The ground was soft there. I should have seen more tracks, but it was like the prints just vanished. At that point, I was shaking from adrenaline and the cold night air. I coaxed Scout back to the tent, forcibly zipped us inside. I couldn't sleep for the next couple of hours, listening to Scout's low grumbles as he lay with his chin on my legs. Eventually, dawn broke. When I unzipped the tent, I expected to see the footprints, but the ground along the shore was smooth and undisturbed. Any sign of them had been erased. I almost felt insane, except for Scout's damp fur. That day, I noticed more signs that reality around me was flexible. My phone battery was now at 0%, and the device refused to charge from the small solar charger I'd brought. My watch was still stuck at 12:14. When I tried to follow the map for a quick day hike, the land didn't match any topographic detail. It was as if the trail itself had shifted. I eventually turned back, worried I'd get lost. I spent the afternoon collecting firewood further from camp, hacking branches from fallen trees. The day was oddly quiet. No birds, no insects chirping, just the hush of the mountains. I kept waiting for Jake to pop out from behind some pine, but he never did. Late afternoon, I decided to fish along the lake's edge, but caught nothing. The water was so still, no fish rose. Usually you'd see small ripples or movement, but the lake looked like a pane of glass. Scout, who usually loved chasing frogs or sniffing along the shoreline, sat behind me, ears pinned back. He was on edge, and so was I. That evening, the wind picked up, swirling across the lake in sporadic gusts that rattled the pines. It had an almost moaning quality that set my teeth on edge. I tried to start the fire with the new wood I'd gathered, and it caught quickly, burning a bright normal orange. I felt a rush of relief. Maybe tonight I could warm up, eat a proper meal, and calm my nerves. But just as the pot of water began to bubble, the fire flickered neon green for a second, let off a choking hiss, and sputtered out, leaving behind a ring of blackened logs, each one coated in a weird, sooty residue that smelled like rotting eggs. Nauseated, I stumbled away, cursing under my breath. No matter what tinder or kindling I used, pine needles, dried grass, bits of paper from my notebook, the result was the same. The flames died after a few seconds, leaving me in semi-darkness. Eventually, I gave up and ate cold granola bars. I wrestled with the tent zipper that night, tying it closed from the inside. If it opened on its own again, I'd know. Scout lay pressed against me, trembling. I sat there, dog by my side, listening to the wind swirl. It was then I realized something else odd. The wind's moaning sounded almost like words. I leaned closer to the tent wall, and it seemed to whisper, "Nate, not." I chalked it up to my exhausted mind playing tricks. Around midnight, though I can't verify the time because my watch was useless, I drifted off. I woke to the sound of Scout howling in pain. Jumping awake, I fumbled with the zipper, my heart pounding. The cold air blasted my face as I stumbled out into the pitch-black night. My flashlight flickered and died almost instantly, leaving only faint moonlight. I could just barely make out Scout at the water's edge, thrashing around. He wasn't barking, he was yelping, high-pitched and terrified. I sprinted to him, ignoring the sting of rocks under my feet. When I got there, I saw no one else, no sign of what had caused his distress. But Scout was wet, trembling. His eyes looked strange, pupils unnaturally wide, almost all black, and he stared at me like he barely recognized me. "What is it, buddy?" I whispered, kneeling. I tried to pull him away from the water, but he resisted. For a moment, it felt like he was anchored. Then, with a shudder, he let go of whatever hold the lake had on him. I got him back to the tent, dried him off as best I could. He just trembled, tail low. I worried something was physically wrong, maybe an animal attacked him. I searched for bite wounds or scratches, but found only watery mud caked around his torso. No blood. He lay down, refused to meet my eyes. The next morning, Scout wouldn't eat. I tried coaxing him with treats, with bits of jerky and even the last of my peanut butter, but he just sniffed at it and whined. I realized I was running low on certain supplies. My plan had been to fish for fresh protein or occasionally hike back to the truck for more food. But after what had happened with the trails not lining up, I wasn't confident I could find the truck easily, or that I'd even have the nerve to navigate those weirdly shifting paths. Around midday, I heard movement in the trees. I called out, half hoping it was Jake. No reply. Carefully, I ventured toward the sound with my hatchet in hand. 20 yards from my sight, I found a single hiking boot. I recognized it as the same style Jake wore when we first met. The same dusty color, same brand. Inside was a wet sock. No sign of blood, but the ground was damp. Muddy footprints led deeper into the forest. I followed them for a short distance, but they suddenly stopped on dry, rocky ground. I swallowed hard, fear prickling. I was in far over my head with something I couldn't explain. The primal part of my brain screamed leave now, but a sickly curiosity or stubbornness kept me from packing up. Also, some part of me still felt that maybe I was losing it. Maybe all these weird events had a rational explanation, but a bigger part of me was terrified. That night, I sat in the dark again, no fire cradling Scout's shaking body. A fine, cold mist drifted down from the mountains. My only source of light was the pale glow of the moon. At some point, Jake stepped into my clearing again so silently I didn't register his presence until he was only a few feet away. I jolted upright, cursing. He looked different. His eyes were shadowed, and his face was slack. His clothes, including his boots, were gone. He was barefoot, wearing only a soaked t-shirt and cargo pants that clung to his body. His hair dripped onto his shoulders. Water dribbled from his ears and nostrils, as if he'd just come out of the lake. "Jake," I said, voice trembling. "What the hell, are you okay?" He stared at me for a long moment, blinking once, slowly. Then he smiled, that too wide smile revealing teeth that seemed longer than before. "It's good," he said softly. "I'm cleansed." I noticed a dark, oily residue around his ankles, the same black mud I'd seen in footprints. My gut twisted. Scout made a low whine, backing up. Jake's eyes flicked to Scout, then back to me. I realized he was stepping toward me in this odd, lurching manner, as though he had to remember how to move each leg. "You should come down to the water, Nate," he said in a raspy whisper. "Come, see Elias. He likes you." My mouth went dry. "Who's Elias?" I managed. Jake's face twitched as if searching for the right words. "He's the one who drowned. Trapper, years ago. He never left. This lake doesn't let things go." His lips formed that grin again, but his eyes remained lifeless. He edged closer, close enough that I could smell the rot on his breath. Instinct kicked in and I scrambled backward. Scout started barking frantically. Suddenly, Jake frowned at Scout. A flicker of anger crossed his features. He knelt, half-crouched, arms out. The dog must be cleansed. He lurched forward, trying to grab Scout's collar. Scout yelped, darting aside. Terror pulsed through me. I swung my hatchet up reflexively. "Stay away," I shouted. Jake paused, cocking his head at the blade. Then he snickered, a wet gurgle. "It doesn't matter," he said softly, stepping back into the darkness beyond my tent's boundary. "Soon you'll come, you'll see." I was left gasping, hatchet in hand, adrenaline surging. I wanted to chase him, but fear rooted me in place. I listened for footsteps, but heard only the hiss of wind through the pines. Then the clearing was empty. That night was the worst I'd had so far. Even after Jake left, the sense of being watched never faded. Scout wouldn't sleep, pacing circles around my tent. In the early pre-dawn hours, I heard a heavy, labored breathing just outside the nylon. I didn't dare unzip it. My heart hammered until I thought I'd have a heart attack. When morning finally came, I decided to pack up. Enough was enough. My illusions of a transformative, introspective month in the wilderness had been shattered by pure dread. I needed to get out. I needed real help. But when I stepped outside, I was greeted by a horrifying sight. My backpack, which I'd carefully hung from a tree branch to keep away from critters, was gone. Instead, I found it about 20 yards away, hanging from another branch, the same way I'd seen it the night before, but stuffed with something rancid. I carefully approached, gagging at the smell. Pieces of raw meat spilled from the half-zipped bag, blackened and rotten, covered with writhing maggots. It was not the flesh of any animal I recognized. Long strips with a greasy, human-like texture, including lumps that might have been organs. The stench overwhelmed me. I vomited in the brush. In a panic, I used a stick to knock the bag down. Almost everything inside had been replaced by that rotting meat, except for a few shredded bits of my clothing. My phone, my solar charger, my portable stove, gone. Retching, I stumbled away, tears stinging my eyes. This can't be real. I'm having some sort of breakdown. But the smell was all too real. I resolved to leave with only what I had left. My hatchet, some water, a small amount of jerky I'd hidden in the tent, and the clothes on my back. Scout's leash was clipped to his collar, though I doubted I'd use it. He refused to stray far from me anyway. I figured I could hike out, find the main trail, and get back to the truck within a day if I moved quickly. I had to. There was no way I was sticking around another night. That morning, I started down the path I was sure led back to the trailhead. For the first half hour, I felt a slight rush of confidence. I'm doing it. I'm leaving. But soon I realized the landmarks were all wrong. The terrain felt jumbled, as if the ridges had shifted overnight. I kept seeing rock outcroppings that I didn't remember ascending on the way in. A small stream I didn't recall crossing now cut across my path. My sense of direction was shredded. My compass was worthless, the needle spinning. By mid-afternoon, I found myself at a small clearing I recognized. My campsite. I had somehow circled back. Rage and terror twisted my stomach. Had I gotten disoriented and walked in a loop, or was the forest itself shifting? Exhausted, I sank to the ground. Scout plopped down beside me, whining softly. "I'm sorry, boy," I muttered, stroking his head. "I'm so sorry." His eyes, once bright, seemed clouded over. He barely reacted, except for a trembling in his haunches. Desperation set in, I thought. We could wait for a rescue. People knew I planned to be out here. Eventually, someone might come check, but that could be weeks, even if they had a clue I was in trouble. I had limited food. The possibility that I'd starve or freeze was very real, and that's if the horror around me didn't kill me first. Dark clouds rolled in that afternoon, bringing an early dusk. Tired and shaking, I half-heartedly tried to start a fire again. Nothing. Every time I got the smallest flame, it would hiss and sputter out, leaving behind that foul, sulfuric smell. So I huddled in the tent, listening to wind-driven rain pummel the fabric. Water leaked in at the corners. My tent was not made for storms like this. I sat in damp misery, arms wrapped around Scout, trying to keep him calm. My mind drifted in and out of anxious near sleep. That's when I heard the scuffling sound of something moving around in the downpour. I froze. The silhouette of someone, definitely a human figure, passed by the side of my tent. I heard heavy, wet breathing, followed by a low, warped moan. Scout let out a whimper. The figure circled around to the front. Lightning flashed, illuminating the shape through the tent wall. A man, limbs angled unnaturally, possibly on all fours. I couldn't breathe. Then the figure rose to a standing position, placing a hand against the nylon. I saw the outline of fingers, too many joints pressing inward. Rain hammered down, drowning out all but my thudding heartbeat. Then, just as suddenly, it moved away. I waited, listening to the storm for hours, wide-eyed, until the exhaustion eventually got the better of me and I passed out. Morning light revealed the tent unzipped from the outside. The zipper was down, but the flap was still closed. Scout was inside, but I found muddy handprints on the outside walls, each print elongated with 6 finger marks. I decided I'd try leaving one last time, forging a different route, maybe heading east instead of following the main path. Even if I ended up in the middle of nowhere, the wilderness was large, but eventually I could find a road or a stream leading down. Anything to escape the lake. I grabbed what was left of my gear, really just the hatchet, a small water bottle, a pitiful amount of jerky, and a battered notebook with a pen. My boots felt heavier than usual, caked in mud. Scout limped after me, favoring his back leg. The poor dog was clearly injured or traumatized, but I had no choice. We left the cursed campsite behind. I refused to look back at the silent waters of Sawtooth Lake. The hair on the back of my neck prickled with the sense that someone was watching me go. For hours, I pressed on. Rain from the night before left the ground slick. Twice, I slipped, bruising my knees. Midway through the afternoon, I found a rocky ridge that gave me a vantage point. I spotted a valley below that looked unfamiliar. The shape of the land should have told me I was near the route back to Iron Creek, but the arrangement of mountains made no sense. Everything looked warped, as if the distance between peaks was smaller than it should be. Cliffs jutted at impossible angles. My chest tightened with panic, but I kept going, half sliding down the slope. By late afternoon, we reached a narrow gorge. Water rushed through a channel of rock, forming a small waterfall. I recognized no such landmark from the original trail-in, but I was desperate. We followed the water's course for a mile or so before it veered off into thick tangles of underbrush. The sun dipped behind the mountains, plunging me into an early twilight. I realized I had nowhere safe to sleep. The temperature would drop soon, but the idea of building a fire felt futile. Nonetheless, I gave it a try in the gorge, collecting the driest wood I could find from under overhangs. I found a small recess beneath a large boulder where I could shelter. With numb fingers, I tried to spark a flame using the last of my matches. Nothing. Every match fizzled as if dipped in water. In desperation, I scraped my hatchet against a rock, trying to generate sparks. The bits of tinder I'd gathered only smoldered black before giving off that acrid stench again. Scout whined, tail between his legs, stepping away from the noxious smoke. I decided to stay in the recess with no fire, just me and my trembling dog in the darkness. Hunger gnawed at my stomach. The cold crept into my bones. I wondered what Kaylee would think if she could see me now. Would she pity me? Would she say I deserved this for shutting her out all those years? My mind churned. A snapping twig echoed behind the boulder. I went silent, pressing myself flat, hand tight on the hatchet. Something shuffled closer. Then I heard a ragged breathing. Jake's voice, or something like it, hoarse and wet. Without warning, a face peered around the boulder, inches from mine. Jake's slack features, eyes black in the darkness. I screamed, swinging the hatchet wildly. He jerked back. I tore out of the recess, stumbling over a rock, scrambling uphill. Scout barked furiously, bounding after me. Jake, or whatever he was, gave chase. He moved with unnatural speed, skittering up the slope on all fours like a spider. I slashed the air behind me, half expecting to feel my blade strike flesh at any moment, but no contact. Eventually, I managed to put distance between us, losing him in the gloom of the pines. I didn't dare stop. I ran until my lungs burned, until Scout collapsed from exhaustion. We found a small clearing carpeted in pine needles. My legs shook so badly I could barely stand. There, I finally collapsed next to Scout, panting. We both drifted into a fitful sleep, huddled against each other in the cold. I dreamt of drowning. In my dream, something dragged me beneath black water, a hand gripping my ankle. Beneath the surface, a face stared up, mouth open in a silent scream. I woke with a start, sweat freezing on my skin, to see that the dawn light was bright enough to reveal the clearing. That's when I noticed a horrible stench again. Rot and decay. I looked to my left and realized Scout had left me. Panicking, I sat upright, scanning the clearing. He was about 10 yards away, facing the trees. He looked at me over his shoulder, eyes milky, his body soaked in morning dew. "Scout?" I called gently. He just stared. Then he bared his teeth. It was not like his usual playful grin. It was a snarl, teeth parted, ears pinned. My heart sank. "Buddy, come here," I begged, voice cracking. He took a step toward me, then lunged. I only had enough time to raise my arm. He sank his teeth into my forearm, and I howled in pain. Warm blood trickled down my skin. Stunned, I shouted his name again, trying to pry his jaws loose. His eyes looked vacant, as if he wasn't even aware of what he was doing. I managed to bring the hatchet's handle around, pressing it against his throat, forcing him back. He released my arm, growling low, and I staggered away. I wanted to believe I could fix this, that maybe he was in shock or had rabies or something. But his eyes, they were almost white, the pupils lost in a swirl of pale color. He advanced again, his posture all wrong. My sweet dog was gone. Something else had taken his place. He leapt at me. Instinctively, I swung the hatchet. The dull side struck him in the shoulder, knocking him sideways with a yelp. He scrambled upright, came again, foam dripping from his jaws. Hot tears blurred my vision. I swung again, screaming his name. This time the blade caught him across the flank. He let out a horrible, pained howl and collapsed. Blood poured onto the pine needles. My stomach lurched. I dropped to my knees, sobbing as Scout whimpered and twitched. He looked at me, eyes vacant, and let out a final rasp before his body went still. I sat there in shock. tears burning tracks down my cheeks. In the haze of agony and guilt, I didn't even register time passing. I kept holding him, expecting him to breathe again. For the rest of my life, that image will haunt me. Me kneeling over Scout's lifeless form, the echo of the blow still ringing in my ears. Eventually, something in me clicked. Survival mode. I forced myself to move. I couldn't bury him properly. The ground was rocky and I had no shovel. I found a patch of softer earth near a thick pine and used my hatchet and bare hands to dig a shallow grave. My hands were cut and raw by the end, my bandaged arm throbbing. I placed him in the hole, covering him with soil and rocks. Then I just sat there, numb. Everything I came here to do, find peace, find myself, was destroyed. And Scout was gone. I lost track of how many hours I sat. My thirst grew unbearable, so I eventually forced myself to stand and search for water. My plan was to keep heading away from the lake, ignoring the insane illusions of the forest. If I died in the attempt, so be it. At least I wouldn't die up there, tormented by nightmares. Using the sun's position, I guessed east. My watch was obviously no help. I stumbled on through the labyrinth of trees. Multiple times I thought I glimpsed a flicker of movement. Jake's silhouette, or something else, dashing between pines. Each time, adrenaline flared, spurring me onward. My wound from Scout's bite ached. I hoped it wouldn't get infected. The hours bled together, my mind drifting. I passed a ravine that looked strangely familiar. Dehydrated, I licked my cracked lips. I realized I had no water. My bottle was lost in the scuffle with Scout. Suddenly, I felt dizzy, the ground spinning. Somehow, I found a stream. I dropped to my knees, ignoring any potential contamination, and drank my fill. The cold water cleared my head enough to realize I was near an overgrown path that might have once been a trail. I followed it, my heart filled with fragile hope. After maybe half an hour, I noticed the forest thinning. Could it be the edge, near the road? But as I pressed through the final line of trees, I froze. I was standing at the shore of Sawtooth Lake again. My campsite. The tent was there, battered from the wind, the fabric torn. The fire ring I'd made was scattered, rocks overturned. The place looked older, as if abandoned for years. My knees buckled. I wanted to scream. I'd been walking east for hours, maybe all day, and I ended up back here? That's when I saw something strung up in a tree along the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it was an animal carcass. Then I realized it was a human body rotting. The flesh sloughed off in ribbons, the face bloated and black. But despite the decay, I recognized the same hazel eyes I'd seen in Jake, now rolled back in his skull. My stomach twisted, bile rising. So, Jake was dead. But that meant who, or what, was the version of him that kept appearing. Time felt unreal. My head spun and I pitched forward onto my hands, retching. The stench was unbearable. I crawled away, tears streaming again. That's when something stirred behind me. A voice hissed, "Nate." I turned to see Jake, alive and not rotting, standing on the far side of my old campsite. He was completely naked now, hair tangled with weeds, water dripping from his entire body. Next to him stood a tall, gaunt figure in ragged clothes from another century. Long beard, wide-brimmed hat askew, eyes hollow. I suddenly had the wild thought, Elias Crane, the ghost who drowned. Before I could blink, the figure flickered and vanished. Jake remained, stepping toward me. His eyes shone with something like pity. "You should have joined me in the water," he rasped. "You made it so hard. Now you've killed your dog. This is all so unnecessary." Rage and horror boiled over in me. I scrambled to my feet, gripping my hatchet. Jake advanced, arms out in a beckoning gesture. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's end this." I noticed the ring on his chest where I'd struck him with the hatchet's pole before. A bruised circle. I snarled and swung the blade. He didn't bother dodging, just let me bury it in his shoulder. A crack of bone echoed. Black water splashed from the wound, and he staggered. Then he looked up, grinning, and grabbed my wrist with a strength that numbed my hand. I yelped, trying to pull free. He shoved me backward. I fell near the lake's edge, gasping. Water sloshed around my legs. He came at me again. I realized if he got me in the water, I'd be done for. Summoning every ounce of will, I swung the hatchet again. This time, I struck him in the chest, the blade sliding between ribs with a wet, sickening sound. For a moment, he just stared, eyes wide. Then a torrent of blackish fluid gushed over my hands, and he collapsed into the shallows, dissolving into a slurry of fish bones, waterlogged cloth, and chunks of rotting matter. It was as if his body gave up all pretense of solidity. The stench made me gag as I staggered away from the water, hatchet dripping with slime. My relief was short-lived. The sun was low in the sky, painting the water a sickly orange. I heard a sound behind me, like someone coughing. I turned, half expecting another twisted vision of Jake. Instead, I saw a figure crouched over something. My heart seized. It was me. Lying on the ground, eyes closed, chest moving shallowly, wearing the same clothes I had on when I first arrived here. This second me had a fresh, undamaged sleeping bag partially wrapped around him. I recognized my face, my arms, my watch still reading 12:14 on that body's wrist. Shock threatened to knock me unconscious. I looked down at my own arms, mud-splattered, crusted with dried blood. I touched my chest, my heartbeat thundered. How was I looking at myself? I stepped closer, half in a trance. The figure was definitely alive, chest rising and falling in gentle breaths. Scout lay at his feet, looking healthy, asleep. My mind reeled with possibilities. Is this a dream? Did I time travel? Is the forest controlling me? A voice whispered across the water. This place doesn't let things go. It sounded like Jake's voice, or perhaps the echo of Elias Crane, carried on the wind. I swallowed, trembling from head to toe. The reflection of the dying sun glimmered across the water, lighting up that second version of me. He stirred, eyelids fluttering. I realized if he woke, he'd see me. Another him, standing there with a bloody hatchet. Or maybe he was me from the past, or the future, or a delusion conjured by the lake. I lurched backward, numb. My reflection in the water was barely visible, as if I were translucent. I could see the shapes of rocks beneath me in the reflection. I inhaled, chest tight, forcing my mind to accept the impossible. I'm not leaving here. Something had claimed me. Something had consumed Scout, and Jake and Elias and I was just another piece in this sick cycle. A wave of sorrow and resignation hit me, but at the same time, a trickle of defiance burned in my chest. I stared down at the half-coherent figure that used to be me, maybe the me from 5 or 6 days ago. I could see a faint bruise on his arm, the place I'd once had an IV when I was hospitalized as a teen. Everything matched. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the wind battered me with that ominous voice. It whispered something that might have been my name, or simply the rustle of pines. I took one last look at my old campsite. The battered tent, the hanged corpse of Jake swaying in the wind, the shallow impression where my recent campfire had been, the lumps of soggy gear. It was a tableau of nightmares. Then I turned and took a step back, away from the water, away from that sleeping version of myself. My arms were beginning to look see-through, as if the setting sun shone right through my skin. I wanted to run, to dash off into the mountains until I either died or found a road. But the ground felt spongy, clinging to my feet. A faint greenish glow rippled over the lake's surface like algae or something deeper and more sinister. I felt it in my bones. The place was hungry. It had claimed me. My mouth felt impossibly dry. I took a shaky breath, tears spilling down my face. As the final rays of sunlight slipped behind the jagged peaks, I saw Scout's grave from the corner of my eye. That fresh mound of rocks. A wave of grief pierced me. My sweet dog, dead by my own hand. My entire body quaked with sobs that echoed over the water. In that moment, I understood that I no longer belonged to the living world. I was just another reflection in the twisted mirror of Sawtooth Lake. I turned back to stare at the figure sleeping on the shore. A creeping thought rose up like poison in my mind. If that version of me wakes up, he'll do everything the same. He'll suffer everything I suffered. This place devoured souls over and over in loops. The horror was personal, cyclical, never-ending. A sudden calm washed over me, a weird acceptance. The hatchet felt weightless in my hand. I stepped toward the other me, raising the blade. Maybe I could spare him the torment I endured. But as I moved closer, the reflection of my body in the water dissolved entirely. I felt a sensation like being pulled backward into darkness. My eyes flicked to the lake, and I caught a fleeting glimpse of my face. Translucent, twisted with anguish. Then I saw a flash of that tall, bearded figure behind me, Elias Crane, clutching my shoulders. I let out a final scream. Then darkness, a sense of drowning, though no water touched my lips. Just an eternal, suffocating black. I don't remember how long I was lost. Maybe seconds, maybe centuries. When a flicker of light returned to my consciousness, I found myself by the shore again, but from a different vantage point. The sun was rising. My left foot was stuck in a jagged crevice of rock. I tried to pull free but felt only a dull, ghostly pain. Then I realized I couldn't see my arms. They were intangible. My body was just a vague outline of shimmering air, like heat haze. I turned, looking at the campsite. I saw him, me, zipping up the tent. Scout bounding around, happily wagging his tail. It was day 2 or 3 or some other time in that loop. I was an observer now, some kind of phantom forced to watch. I tried to call out to warn him, but no sound emerged from my throat. I drifted closer, discovering I could move despite not really having legs. My presence must have alerted Scout. He lifted his head, looking around with a low growl. The same growl I remembered from that day. But neither he nor the other me could see me. They only felt a chill, perhaps a flicker of dread. I was Elias Crane now, or Jake, or something like them, some entity trapped by the lake, compelled to reenact events, maybe nudge them along, keep the cycle going. I realized with horror that this was the final twist. The place didn't let things go. It let them remain, replaying the same tragedy in endless loops. The ghost of Sawtooth Lake had claimed me, bound me to watch my own downfall from a vantage I could never escape. I drifted near the old campsite, powerless as the dog barked at my presence. The other me waved a hand, telling Scout to hush. My new existence, a silent spectator to the horror that was about to unfold again. And that is why I'm writing this, or thinking it, transcribing it in my head, hoping it might reach someone, somewhere, though I have no body with which to hold a pen. Maybe by sheer force of will, these words can escape the lake's curse. I'm Nate Hall. I was 31 when I came here, and now I'm part of this place forever. If you ever see a black lab whining at an empty stretch of forest near Sawtooth Lake, or if you feel a chill in the wind and hear a faint voice calling your name, that's me. That's all that's left of me. This place doesn't let things go. Not me, not Scout, not Jake Merton, not Elias Crane. We're all part of its endless reflection. So, if you ever find yourself at Sawtooth Lake, and you see footprints that vanish, or a figure who looks a bit too familiar for God's sake, turn around. Don't stay, don't camp, run, because you won't be allowed to leave. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 32 years old, and this happened in March of 2023. I don't know if writing it down will help me cope, but I can't keep it inside anymore. I need someone to understand the terror I lived through, to know it was real. Everything you're about to read, I swear on my life, happened. I used to be an urban designer. I lived in Portland, Oregon, stuck in the daily grind of city life, battling traffic, deadlines, noise. It was the kind of hectic environment that seemed designed to tear you apart piece by piece. But it wasn't my stressful job that finally broke me. It was losing my younger brother in a hit and run. His name was Trent. We were born only 2 years apart, and we'd always promised each other we'd escape the city and find someplace quiet, some patch of nature where we could breathe for once. We never got around to it. Then he was gone, and I felt like my own soul had been ripped out. I quit my job soon after, and by the time the winter of 2022 ended, I was making arrangements to move to Idaho. I had stumbled onto a property listing, far out in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, a small decrepit cabin near Hemlock Lake. It wasn't exactly move-in ready. No running water, barely any roof, but the pictures showed an idyllic spot. Tall pines, a glassy lake, no neighbors for miles. I believed I could fix the cabin, live there off-grid, do everything Trent and I had dreamed of. I had no illusions that it would be easy. Part of me wanted it to be as punishing as possible. Guilt can make you crave hardship, as if you deserve the suffering. So, on the first day of March 2023, I drove my old truck to the nearest trailhead. The drive itself took hours along winding dirt roads. My phone had 1 bar of reception at best. When I finally reached the spot where the overgrown path to Hemlock Lake was supposed to begin, the forest looked both inviting and forbidding. Towering pines, thick clusters of brush, patches of snow that winter had left behind. I locked my truck, double-checked my gear, and set off alone. The map I'd brought was recommended by some local hikers online. I had a handheld GPS, a fully charged phone, solar chargers, and backup batteries. Enough food to last 3 months if I rationed carefully. Tools, seeds for a small garden, a portable water filter. I felt prepared. I was ready, or so I thought. Arriving at Hemlock Lake. The hike was brutal right from the start. The trail was barely a trail at all, just a series of shallow depressions in the undergrowth that occasionally aligned with my map. I had to scramble over fallen logs, wade through muddy streams, and constantly brush away the stubborn branches whipping at my arms and pack. It was colder than I'd anticipated, though the sky was clear. The weight of my pack pinched my shoulders until they went numb. But after nearly 5 hours of determined hiking, I came around a slope and saw Hemlock Lake for the first time. It was smaller than I'd imagined, but it had a certain stillness. The water was almost black, reflecting the skeletal pines along its shoreline. The cabin stood about 50 yards from the water's edge. It was a single-room structure made of mossy logs, a short stone chimney, half-collapsed porch. The roof sagged in the middle, as if it had seen too many seasons of snow. It looked older than any photograph I'd seen. I told myself it was perfect. This was what I wanted. Solitude, quiet. A place where I could bury my guilt and maybe find some measure of peace. The first couple of nights I pitched a tent outside the cabin while I checked for structural damage and cleared away debris. The place smelled of mildew and rotting wood. Inside, I found scattered animal droppings, a moldy cot, and a stone hearth that looked like it could collapse at any second. The most unnerving part was that the hearth's iron stove door was bent outward, as though something powerful had kicked it from inside. I shrugged it off. Wild animals could do weird things. Over the next few days, I repaired what I could, nailed some new boards onto the roof. Every muscle in my body ached, but my mind felt less burdened. Physical labor has that effect. First glimpse. On the fourth evening, I started a campfire just outside the cabin. I'd found a ring of stones and built them up, wanting a little warmth as I sat on a stump. The sky turned purple and star-freckled. The forest was alive with night sounds, distant owls, the rustle of small creatures in the brush. It was peaceful, though I did catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. Nothing more than shadows, I told myself. At some point, I got the uneasy feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but a tingle crept up my spine. I turned around to check behind me, scanning the trees with my flashlight. That was when I saw her. A girl, maybe 10 years old, standing between two massive pines about 30 yards away. She was pale, barefoot, in a dirty white dress that might have once been pretty. Her hair was long and matted, hiding parts of her face. She was just still, like a statue. My heart pounded. There was no trail near my cabin. Any hiker would have to trek miles of rough terrain to get here. Why would a little girl be wandering these woods alone and at night? "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing. "Are you lost?" She didn't respond. She didn't even flinch. My flashlight glare hit her eyes. They shone back with a dark, reflective gleam, not the usual red or green glow from an animal's eyes, but something else entirely. A deep blackness. I set down the flashlight and started toward her. "Wait," I said, trying to sound calm. "It's dangerous out here. Are you alone?" I took 3 steps, stumbling over a root. When I looked up again, she was gone. Not a single leaf rustled to mark her passing. I circled the immediate area, calling out, but she vanished into the dark. Confusion battled with concern. My first rational thought was that she could be a child of some backwoods family, or maybe there was another cabin around here. But all the topographical maps showed no other structures for miles. That night, I slept poorly in the tent. My dreams were filled with images of her face, what little I'd seen of it. A face too pale, eyes too hollow. The forest around my cabin seemed a little less welcoming now. Difficulties begin. The next morning, I woke to discover my sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside. That was odd, since I always zipped it tight up to my neck, and I'm a light sleeper. Had I gotten up to use the bathroom in the night half-conscious? Maybe, but it left me unsettled. That same day, I tried to use my phone. The battery icon showed a red sliver despite being fully charged before bed. It died the moment I turned it on. I hooked up my solar charger, thinking it might revive it in a few hours under the sun. While that was going, I checked the GPS. The screen flickered, locked up, then displayed an error message. GPS signal lost. I chalked it up to the thick canopy and put it aside. Worse yet, my extra food, preserved goods that should have lasted months, seemed off. Cans had begun rusting, as if they'd been left in the rain for years. A package of jerky was infested with maggots. I had no explanation for it. The weather was cold, which should have slowed spoilage, but apparently not. When I built a campfire that evening, the flames burned an odd greenish blue, even though I hadn't put anything strange on it. It popped and hissed. The air smelled sour, like rotting seaweed. I told myself it was just some weird mineral in the local wood, but my nerves prickled. The mysterious trapper, On my 7th day at Hemlock Lake, I heard a voice outside the cabin late at night. It was gruff, muffled. I grabbed my flashlight and peered out. A man stood near my dying fire, leaning on a rifle. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a ragged beard and eyes that darted around as though expecting an ambush. "You pick a damn strange spot to hole up," he said by way of greeting. I stepped outside, keeping a cautious distance. "I could say the same about you." He introduced himself as Grayson Tully, a former forest ranger who once patrolled these parts. Left the service years ago. Didn't like the red tape, the new policies. I live further northeast, near the ridge. He pointed vaguely into the woods. "There's a trapline I run for a bit of fur trade. Thought I'd check who was stomping around these parts." Grayson was odd, wiry and scowling, though his eyes held a flicker of curiosity. I offered him some coffee from my pot on the embers, and he drank it slowly. He kept glancing at my cabin as though it personally offended him. "You see anything unusual?" he finally asked, wiping his mouth. "What do you mean by unusual?" He shrugged as if searching for the right words. "These woods have a way of messing with people. Shadows, noises. You might run into folks who don't belong out here. If you see a little girl, don't—" He paused. "Don't talk to her. Don't look at her." My heart thudded. Is that supposed to be a warning? He set down the tin cup with a trembling hand. "She's not a girl, not anymore. Best thing you can do is leave, boy. The lake won't forgive a newcomer, not if it wants you." "I'm not leaving," I said stubbornly. "I'm fixing up the cabin. I want to live here." He stared at me for a long time, the lines on his face deepening. "Then you'd better pray she doesn't set her eyes on you." Without another word, he walked off into the dark. I never even heard his footsteps fade. I wondered if he was just some backwoods loon, but a pit of unease coiled in my stomach. Our conversation had validated my worst fears about the pale girl I saw. She's not a girl. I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't quite do it. Time slips. 2 days later, I decided to scout the northern side of the lake for better vantage points. My plan was to place small notches or ribbons on trees so I wouldn't lose my way. I brought my newly repaired axe, determined to cut branches to mark the path. I left the cabin around 10 a.m., or so my watch said. The sun was bright through the pines. Even as I walked, the forest seemed to grow denser, branches tangling overhead until the sky turned dim. I left my ribbons, but after an hour I'd only gone a few hundred yards. The undergrowth was thick. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing with a mossy boulder in the center. I took a break there, sipping water. I checked my watch. It said 4 p.m. I jumped. "That can't be right," I muttered. It felt like at most an hour had passed, but my watch insisted 6 hours were gone. I even tried my phone, hoping it might show the correct time. It was still dead. The forest felt too quiet. Then I noticed that my own footprints behind me were smudged, as if a strong breeze had partially erased them. But there was no breeze. I decided to turn back. Following the ribbons should have been easy, but some ribbons were gone. The few that remained felt faded, discolored, like they'd been there for months, not hours. As the light dimmed, panic set in. The path seemed to shift. I swore the notches I'd put in a tree trunk were reversed or in different spots. By the time I burst out onto the lakeshore, breath heaving, the sun was setting. I checked my watch once more. 8 p.m. My entire day had vanished. When I returned to the cabin, I found my sleeping bag, which I'd left inside, lying outside in the dirt. Again, it was unzipped from the inside. Disturbances escalate. That night, I dreamed of my brother, Trent. He was calling my name, beckoning me to a hospital corridor. But the corridor kept stretching, and I never reached him. I woke up with tears on my face and realized it was almost noon. I never sleep that late. My entire body was shaking as if I had a fever. Head throbbing. My mind felt slowed down. The next day, I discovered my backpack high in a pine tree, almost 20 feet up, hanging off a branch. It had been unzipped and my supplies were missing. No sign of a bear or any typical animal that might have done that. The rope I'd used to secure food from animals was still coiled inside the pack, which meant no normal creature had hauled it up there. Either a person had done it, or something else entirely. My attempts at building a small garden near the lake were thwarted by sudden storms that came and went, drenching the soil, washing away my seedlings. When the sun returned, it baked everything into a dense clay. I'd never encountered such unpredictable weather patterns in my life. It was as though the forest was punishing me, pushing me away. One evening, I returned to the cabin after gathering wood to find a doll sitting in the middle of the floor. It was rotted, old-fashioned, porcelain face cracked, missing an eye. I'd never owned a doll, and the cabin had been empty when I arrived. The moment I touched it, the porcelain crumbled in my hand. Then I caught the faint echo of a child's laughter just beyond the walls. The second meeting with Grayson. I lit lanterns, trying to chase away the oppressive dark. That was when I heard footsteps. Hurrying outside, I spotted Grayson Tully again, limping out of the tree line. This time he looked haggard, pale as a ghost, and he was clutching his leg, which was stained dark with something. "Damn it," he hissed, leaning against the side of my cabin. I rushed to help, though I still didn't fully trust him. The leg had a deep gash that looked infected, swollen red with pus. His breathing came in sharp gasps. "Jesus, Grayson," I said, "what happened?" "She found me," he murmured through gritted teeth. "Came to my shack, pretended to be my wife. Thought I was strong enough to fight her off." His eyes darted as if to check the corners. I only caught the name she. Instantly, I knew who he meant. The girl. Ava. I felt my stomach twist. Still, I dragged him into the cabin, rummaged through my meager first aid kit and tried to clean the wound. He winced, lips tight, as I pressed gauze to his leg. We sat in silence, lit by a single lantern. "You have to leave," he finally said. "If she's marked you, it's only a matter of time." "Why does she keep appearing? Why is she this way?" I asked. My voice trembled more than I liked. "She's older than this forest," Grayson said. His gaze slid to the door as though he expected her to walk in at any second. Wears the shape of a child because it's easier to lure people in. She's not like a regular ghost. She can mimic the memories of the ones she devours. She can appear as anything. Even your brother, if she knows about him. I froze. "My brother's gone," I managed. "He died." A pained look crossed Grayson's face. "Doesn't matter to her. She finds a weakness in you, uses it." His eyelids drooped. Blood loss was taking its toll. He took a shaky breath. "Promise me you'll burn this place down and get out. There's no saving a land she's claimed." His words sank into me like stones. But I'd come all this way. I'd left my entire life behind. Burning the cabin felt like giving up. "I can't. I have nowhere else." "You'll die if you stay," he whispered. I tried to tend to his leg as best I could, gave him some water. Exhausted, I drifted off to a fitful sleep, hearing him mumble something about his wife and child. He never told me how he lost them, but I suspected the worst. When I woke, Grayson was gone. The door was wide open. A trail of bloody footprints led off into the woods. He'd left my first aid supplies scattered in a corner, as though he'd woken in a frenzy and bolted. She comes in. For the next few days, the bizarre happenings escalated. My cabin door would sometimes be found unlocked, even though I always bolted it from the inside. The map on my wall, the local topography I used to keep track of the area, suddenly showed an extra lake behind mine, labeled in faint ink. The words Hollow Lake scrawled there in letters that matched my handwriting, though I didn't remember writing it. Time warped more severely. On more than one occasion, I swore it was morning, but the sun was setting within what felt like half an hour. I'd start a chore, chopping wood or reorganizing my supplies, and look up to find entire days had slipped away. My 5 o'clock shadow grew into a thick beard in what I thought was overnight. I lost track of the date, and then one night I found her in the cabin. I woke to the smell of rotting leaves. The lantern was out, but enough moonlight came in through the broken shutters for me to see her outline at my table. I scrambled up, heart hammering. She was just sitting there in a chair pulled close to the table, her hands on the wood as if waiting to be served dinner. "Ava," I whispered, though I didn't know how I knew her name. It just slipped out. She didn't respond. Her face was turned toward me, the faint glimmer of her eyes visible in the dark. I wanted to lunge for the axe, but it was too far away. My legs wouldn't move anyway. My entire body was seized by fear. She stood slowly, her posture unnerving, one shoulder higher than the other, head tilted. Without a sound, she walked out the open door. I should have chased her, or maybe I shouldn't have. I lay there, panting until the first hints of dawn. When I finally stepped outside, a bizarre calm had settled. The forest was silent. No wind, no birds, no insects. The stillness felt like being in a painting. The lost footage. In a desperate attempt at proof or clarity, I set up an old trail camera I'd found in the cabin's storage chest, left behind by the previous owner, I assumed. The camera was designed to record whenever motion was detected. I positioned it so it would face the porch and door. That night, as I pretended to sleep in my cot, I heard a faint scuffling. The camera would be rolling, but even that didn't give me comfort. My heart thumped in my ears. I was drenched in cold sweat, waiting for her to appear. Eventually, I dozed off in exhaustion. In the morning, I retrieved the camera's memory card and plugged it into my laptop, my only functioning device left with any battery. I'd saved it with a solar charger dedicated for it. The first few motion events were me going in and out of the cabin, or the wind knocking a branch. Then, around 2:17 a.m., the camera triggered again. The screen flickered with static for a few seconds. Then, a figure in white drifted onto the porch. Ava, but not just her. She seemed to carry something under her arm. As she approached the cabin door, her face turned up to the camera, her eyes reflecting the lens. She stared for so long I wondered how any human could go that long without blinking. She walked inside. Then the screen flickered again. When it returned, the time read 4:02 a.m., and she was stepping out. She paused, turned to the camera, and for a moment her face changed. It stretched longer, older. The corners of her mouth pulled into a too-wide smile. My blood turned to ice. Then the recording ended. I replayed it. Sure, I'd seen some glitch or trick of the light, but it was there. I copied the file onto my laptop's hard drive, terrified the memory card might corrupt, but each time I watched it, my stomach churned with the same horror. 2 hours unaccounted for. She'd been inside for 2 hours. Doing what? My spine prickled as I thought of her rummaging through my cabin, rummaging through me. A voice from the past. That same day, I found something else horrifying. Next to my bedroll on the small table where I kept a battered old tape recorder, one I use sometimes to record personal notes, there was a new tape inside. The label read, T, just T. I pressed play, and a voice came through, scratched but unmistakable. "Ethan?" said the voice, my brother's voice. Why did you leave me? My heart nearly jumped into my throat. Trent? I said out loud, though logically it was impossible. Trent had been dead for over a year. The tape played on, hissy background noise. Then his voice returned, sharper. You should have died instead, it accused. You left me there, alone in the street. I threw the recorder at the wall, feeling tears stream down my cheeks. There was no way that voice was my brother's. She was using his voice. Ava had found my weakness. She knew about my guilt, or maybe I'd told her in my dreams. My hands shook uncontrollably. I realized I had to leave before I lost my mind. But that same night, I heard footsteps again. My adrenaline spiked. I ran outside with the axe. No sign of Ava. Instead, I found Grayson Tully, collapsed just beyond the tree line, whimpering. I rushed over. He was alive, but in agony. His leg was worse, flesh blackening, as though rotting. He met my gaze, eyes wild with terror. She's in me, he hissed. She got inside me. What do you mean? I said, trying to help him to his feet. He clutched my arm. We have to kill her, iron or fire. She hates both. I half dragged him to the cabin. He trembled, rambling about how he'd seen his dead wife in the woods, how she'd called to him, begged him to follow. It wasn't her. She took my wife's face. My boy's face, too. He curled up near the hearth. I gave him water, and for a moment he was calmer. Then a ripple went through him, a spasm. He seized my arm with shocking strength. Don't trust me, he rasped. I'm not all here. She's using me. I had no idea what to do. He slumped back, breathing raggedly. After a time, I drifted toward the edge of the hearth to try to sleep, the axe within reach. The betrayal. Hours later, though it could have been days, my eyes snapped open. Grayson was standing over me. He had my own axe in his hands, his face twisted into a mask of mania. But there was something else about him. He was smiling too widely, not blinking. Ethan, he said in a voice that wasn't entirely his, you're the last one I need. I scrambled away, knocking over a lantern, which shattered. Kerosene spilled and caught a small flame from the dying fireplace, igniting a swirl of orange along the wall. My heart thundered. Grayson, what are you doing? I yelled. He lunged, swinging the axe in a clumsy arc. I ducked. The blade bit into the bedroll. I tried to get to the cabin door, but he blocked my path with unnatural speed. Why run? His words came out in two layers, one deep, one high. She wants you. She already has your mind. I grabbed a broken chair leg, brandishing it like a weapon. My eyes darted to the iron stove door, remembering what Grayson had said. Iron or fire. The stove door was half rusted, but it was heavy. If I could pry it off, maybe I could use it. Grayson swung again. I jumped aside, the blade splintering the table. My lungs seized in fear. The orange glow of the flames on the wall grew brighter, sparks dancing. The cabin was going to burn down around us. I let Grayson get close, then lunged for the iron stovepipe that jutted out from the hearth. It was old and rusted, but I managed to yank it loose with a burst of adrenaline. He came at me once more. I swung the iron pipe. It connected with a sickening crunch, smashing into his jaw. He staggered back, spitting blood. The wide grin never left his face, but his eyes bulged with rage. He charged again, and I struck him in the side of the head. He collapsed onto his back, twitching. I panted, barely registering the searing heat on my left side as the fire spread. He tried to rise, axe still in hand, so I brought the pipe down a third time on his right leg, the one already infected. A crack. He screamed, a guttural, inhuman sound. For a moment, he stilled, blood seeping across the filthy cabin floor. Then he jerked upright, a last surge of unholy strength. "You can't kill me," he hissed, voice warping. "I belong to her now." I felt panic surge. Smoke thickened the air. I coughed. The entire cabin threatened to collapse in flames. Through the crackling, I heard a child's laughter echo outside, faint but clear. I swung the iron pipe at Grayson's leg once more, a savage blow. Bone snapped. His scream tore at my ears, and he finally slumped, unconscious or dying. My eyes burned from smoke, tears streaming down my cheeks. I had to get out. Escaping the flames. I stumbled through the door, half blind, the iron pipe still clutched in my fist. Firelight danced behind me, illuminating the clearing around Hemlock Lake. Sparks soared into the sky. I collapsed onto my knees in the dirt, gulping fresh air. The cabin roared as the flames spread. I listened for movement behind me, but there was no sound of Grayson pursuing. Just the dry hiss of flames and the pop of timber. But something else was there. Ava stood by the lake, silhouetted against the reflection of the fire. The dying grass around her feet seemed to shiver. I felt an urge to run at her, pipe swinging. But she stared with that same hollow gaze, lips parted slightly as if tasting the night air. "You did well," she said or whispered. Her voice carried effortlessly across the distance. "I like it when they fight." My grip tightened on the iron pipe. "Stay away from me." She tilted her head. Moonlight caught her eyes, turning them into bottomless pools. "It's too late. I've been with you since you first came here." Behind her, the surface of Hemlock Lake rippled, a black ring expanding outward. The reflection of my burning cabin shuddered in the water. I took a step back, scanning for any route of escape. My truck was miles away, past a trail that might not even exist properly anymore. My supplies were mostly in the cabin, which was now in flames. I was stranded. As if sensing my desperation, Ava took a step forward. The motion was unnatural, like a marionette. "Don't fight it, Ethan," she said. "Come with me." In that instant, I remembered Grayson's words, the way he'd said she hated iron, and I still had the pipe. Maybe I could end this. Final confrontation at the lake. Summoning courage from I don't know where, I charged at her with a guttural shout. She didn't move at first, as though she couldn't comprehend my sudden aggression. At the last moment, she slid aside effortlessly, stepping in a sideways shuffle that defied normal movement. I swung the pipe blindly. It grazed her arm and she shrieked, stumbling back. Her cry was high-pitched, warping into a series of overlapping voices. She slumped to the ground, holding her arm. It bent at an odd angle, as though it were more rubber than bone. I raised the pipe, prepared to strike again. She twisted her face toward me, and for a moment it wasn't a child's face at all, but an ancient, withered visage that flickered in the firelight. Her mouth yawned open, revealing rows of tiny, needle-sharp teeth. My stomach lurched, but I brought the pipe down again, aiming for the center of that grotesque visage. She moved faster than I could follow. One moment on the ground, the next she was behind me, her small hands gripping my shoulders with surprising strength. Something cold and slimy seeped through my shirt. She leaned in, and I heard my brother's voice again. "It's your fault, Ethan." Rage and guilt collided in my chest. I spun, smashing the pipe behind me. It glanced off her body and she staggered. Her shape flickered, outlines bending, as if she was struggling to maintain the child form. For an instant, I glimpsed dozens of faces pushing out from her skin like trapped souls. One face was definitely Grayson's, another was an older woman's, and so many more. They bulged outward, moaning, then sank back as she clutched her wounded arm. I heard the water behind me. She was edging me toward the lake, that dark expanse that mirrored the flames. My hair was singed, my lungs filled with acrid smoke, but adrenaline kept me upright. She hissed, "All your pain, all your guilt, I can free you. You need only give in." Her voice layered again, a horrifying chorus that made my ears ache. "I won't be yours," I managed. With a final surge, I rammed the pipe into her chest. She screamed, a sound that tore the night wide open. Dark fluid, almost tar-like, seeped around the metal. I expected her to topple, but she grabbed me in a spasm of unnatural strength. My feet slid on the bank's wet mud, and I nearly went face first into the lake. Still impaled, she twisted her body away and fixed those eerie eyes on me. Through her parted lips, I heard a rattling hiss. She took a stumbling step back, pulling the pipe deeper into herself as though trying to drag me with it. I refused to let go. I wrenched the pipe free with a sickening squelch. She collapsed to her knees at the water's edge. For a brief instant, she looked exactly like a wounded child, tears running down pale cheeks. I felt a flicker of doubt. But then her lips curled into that same too-wide grin and she fell backward into the lake. The black water swallowed her instantly, leaving only ripples. Aftermath and flight. I stood there panting, my mind swimming. The reflection of the roaring fire danced on the lake's surface. She was gone. Or was she? My hands trembled so hard that I dropped the pipe. It sank into the shallow water with a gurgle. In that moment, I wanted to collapse, to let the fatigue and horror wash over me. But survival instincts kicked in. I turned to see the cabin fully engulfed, embers drifting skyward. A corner of the roof caved, sending sparks spewing into the night. Inside, Grayson might still be alive, or perhaps he was already dead. Either way, if he was still conscious, the smoke or flames would finish him. I had no way to rescue him without dying myself. My eyes stung with tears. He was no innocent man, but he hadn't deserved this fate. I sprinted along the lake shore, searching for the trail that led back to my truck. I found the path, or what I hoped was the path. My map was gone, my GPS useless, but I wouldn't stay another second. Branches clawed at my face, the ground uneven, but I pushed on. My body ached, my mind was half broken, but I refused to let the forest swallow me. At some point, dawn light filtered through the trees. Or maybe it was dusk again. I couldn't tell. Time felt wrong. I trudged onward, one foot in front of the other, driven by a single purpose: escape. I passed places that seemed familiar, though I wasn't certain. A clearing with a mossy boulder, a ravine with a trickle of water. My head pounded with dehydration. My canteen had melted in the cabin. At one point, I sank to my knees and drank from a muddy stream. I almost vomited. The day, if it was a day, stretched on. My feet bled in my boots. My entire body felt ready to collapse. Yet, I kept stumbling forward, sometimes delirious, hearing Trent's voice or Ava's laughter whispering in the trees. I tried to block it out. Eventually, I reached a dirt road. My truck was parked exactly where I'd left it. Relief overwhelmed me. I unlocked the door, practically fell inside. My hands shook as I tried the ignition. It coughed, sputtered, but then roared to life. I had half a tank of gas, more than enough. I reversed onto the road, not caring about the branches scraping the paint. I pulled away fast, jostling over rocks and potholes, until the cabin and Hemlock Lake were a memory in my rearview mirror. Endless haunting. I expected to feel overwhelming relief. Instead, my mind was a frantic swirl. I had no proof of what happened, no real way to explain it. As far as I knew, Hemlock Lake was still there, probably still burning. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main highway, then a small town. I found a gas station, stumbling inside half crazed. The cashier stared wide-eyed at my soot-stained clothes and wild expression. I might have begged for a phone. Next thing I knew, paramedics were there. I blacked out. I came to in a hospital bed, an IV in my arm. My reflection in the metal siding of a medical cart looked older, haggard. My hair had streaks of gray that weren't there before. My beard was patchy and unkempt. The nurse said something about severe dehydration, possible exposure. The local sheriff asked me questions, but I couldn't give coherent answers. A little girl, I babbled. A demon or spirit, I stabbed her with iron. She's still out there. They looked at me the way you look at a lunatic. I stopped talking about it. I was under observation for 2 days. They told me I'd been found near the edge of a logging road, delirious, as though I'd been wandering for days, not hours. When I asked the date, I discovered it was 10 days after I'd left the cabin, though by my own account it should have been maybe 3 or 4. That hammered the final nail of terror into my soul. Something was deeply wrong with time in those woods. On the second day, a doctor gently asked if maybe I'd had a break from reality, triggered by grief over my brother's death and the isolation. She implied everything I'd seen was a hallucination, but I knew better. The bruises on my arms, the scars of the rope-like cuts on my ankles, and the nightmarish memories were far too real. I never told them about the possessed Grayson or the shrieking child of the lake. They wouldn't believe me. No true escape. They released me once my vitals stabilized. The sheriff's office said they'd go out to my property, but the way they eyed me suggested they wouldn't trek too deep. Idaho has plenty of remote corners, and a burned-out cabin might not raise eyebrows if they decided it was an accidental fire. I'm sure they'll send some token search party, if even that. Perhaps they'll find nothing. I ended up in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Boise, trying to decide if I should call someone, a friend from my old life. But I had no one left I trusted enough. My parents are gone, my brother is dead, and my old co-workers will just see me as a cautionary tale. I stare at my reflection every day, noticing the new lines around my eyes, the haunted look that won't go away. The nightmares about Ava continue. I see her dancing along the shore, her eyes fixed on me. Sometimes I hear Trent's voice calling from behind me, telling me to look back. In my dreams, I do, and she's there, inches away, smiling with that ghoulish grin. I don't think I'm safe even though I'm miles away. At times, I spot a flicker of movement in the corner of my vision. I hear the soft giggle of a child. My phone, which I replaced, still glitches. Black screens, random static that sometimes forms half words I recognize from the tape. And whenever I doze off, I wake to find things are moved. A bag unzipped, a door unlocked. Always so small, so plausible to doubt. But I know the truth. I've tried to rationalize it, but at night I accept it. She knows where I am. The boundaries of those cursed woods might not contain her. It was never truly about the cabin. She latched onto me the moment I saw her, and I'm not sure she'll ever let go. Maybe she's biding her time, waiting for my mind to unravel further. Maybe she's just toying with me, savoring my terror from afar. Or maybe she's closer than I think, wearing some innocent face right outside my door. I keep the iron pipe from the cabin with me, though it's now rusted and battered. I salvaged it from my truck bed before they took me to the hospital. At night, I clutch it, remembering how her flesh sizzled at the touch of cold metal. It's my only comfort, my only weapon. But how do you fight something that can twist reality, devour memories, and tear the minds of men? Sometimes, I think I might go back to Hemlock Lake and finish what I started, burn the entire forest down if I have to. But even that might not be enough. She's older than the woods, older than any settlement. She's a fragment of something bigger and darker than I can comprehend. Going back might only feed her further. So, I write this down now, in a cramped motel room, the flickering neon sign outside casting sickly light through the blinds. If anyone finds my words, if you ever consider hiking near Hemlock Lake, or if you catch a glimpse of a pale barefoot girl staring at you from the trees, turn around. Don't speak. Don't engage. Run. I promise you, you don't want her attention. I don't know where I'll go next. I have just enough money left to keep running for a while, but running might be useless. The reflection in the bathroom mirror lags when I move. I see my eyes blink a fraction of a second too late. My beard is a half gray now, my face gaunt. When I hold the mirror to the bed, I swear I see footprints that aren't mine on the carpet. And just last night I heard the faint hiss of a young girl outside the motel room door calling, "Ethan, let me in." The nightmares of Hemlock Lake won't end. I fear the day I lose track of time entirely, waking up in some other place, perhaps in the forest again, or under the black water of the lake. Or worse, waking up inside a cabin that's been burned to ash, with her sitting in the corner, eyes as dark as oblivion. But for now, I lock the door. I keep the iron pipe close. My name is Ethan Cole, and if you're reading this, please believe me. This happened in March of 2023, and it's not over. It's never truly over. I can still feel her eyes on me even when I close mine. The hollow eyes of Hemlock Lake follow wherever I go, and I suspect they always will. My name is Jack Riley. I'm 32 years old. This happened in October of 2023, and it still feels surreal when I think about it, like a fever dream that lodged itself somewhere deep in my brain. But I assure you, everything I describe here is what I experienced in the remote wilderness of Hell's Canyon, Idaho. I was a software engineer by trade. I'd lived in Seattle for years, crammed into a tiny apartment with a view of a brick wall and a scattered sliver of sky. After the meltdown of my professional and personal life, losing my job, ending an engagement, drifting from friends and family, I hit a breaking point. I had heard that sometimes all you needed was to disconnect from everything that reminded you of your failures. So, I packed a few essentials, grabbed my dog, a black German shepherd named Scout, and headed for the solitude of Hell's Canyon wilderness in Idaho. My plan was simple. I'd spend a full month out there by myself, or as alone as one can be with a dog. I'd keep an audio diary on a solar-powered digital recorder, partly as therapy, partly because I harbored an eccentric dream of releasing some kind of minimalistic wilderness podcast, alone in the wild. If I managed to pull that off, maybe I'd demonstrate some kind of resilience, prove to myself and everyone else that I could survive something, that I wasn't just a failure in life, relationships, and everything that mattered. I am not a veteran, nor am I an avid survivalist. I only had a basic handle on camping: how to pitch a tent, how to start a fire, how to navigate with a map and compass. Mostly YouTube learned skills, plus a few weekend trips in simpler state parks. But I needed a real challenge, or maybe I just wanted to punish myself with hardship. Either way, that's how I ended up driving from Seattle through the farmland and mountain roads until I reached the edges of Hell's Canyon, a place rumored to be deeper than the Grand Canyon in some stretches, a place historically called the River of No Return. Yet, that name didn't scare me half as much as the possibility of returning to the city and trying to face my old life again. I parked at a tiny, worn-out trailhead near the Snake River. The sign was half gone, bullet holes riddling what was left. Scout hopped out of the car and spun in excited circles, her black tail wagging. She'd always been high energy, but it felt like she sensed a new kind of freedom. As for me, I took stock of my gear: tent, sleeping bag, cooking stove, freeze-dried meals, first aid kit, a rifle I'd never used in a real hunt, various small tools, a sturdy pair of boots, maps, a compass, and a solar charger for my phone and digital recorder. Everything I thought I'd need, plus a margin of error in case the trip lasted a bit longer. Only later would I realize how naive it all was. Nothing can really prepare you for what I would face. I still remember the first 3 days in the wilderness as a kind of honeymoon period. The scenery was spectacular. Rugged mountains, dramatic river canyons, a sky so big it looked like a different planet. The crisp, cool air helped me sleep better than I had in years. I set up my first campsite near a ridge that overlooked the canyon, and I spent a day just walking up and down the paths with Scout. Once in a while, I'd talk into the recorder about how I felt freer than ever, how maybe this was the first step in truly finding myself. On the second night, I even found a spot where a small waterfall trickled down, forming a clear pool. Scout and I splashed around, my mood soaring. That changed on the evening of day 3. I remember it vividly. The sunset was an explosion of orange and pink. I'd lit a small fire to boil water for my freeze-dried lasagna. Scout was lying next to me, warming her fur by the flames. That was when I caught movement at the edge of my vision. A man was walking toward me. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a scruffy gray beard and a slight stoop. He wore worn, dust-caked outdoor clothes, like a ranger's uniform gone to seed, and carried a walking stick. My first thought was that he was another hiker, or maybe an off-duty ranger, though it felt odd that I hadn't seen a soul for days. "Hello there," he said, voice crackling with a friendly warmth. "Didn't expect to see anyone this far out." I introduced myself. He nodded and said, "Name's Granger." I asked if he needed anything, water, a rest, directions. He shook his head. Up close, something about him was off, but I couldn't pin it down. His eyes were strangely bright, and though the sun was low, I had a fleeting impression that he didn't cast much of a shadow. Maybe it was the way the light fell. I tried not to think too hard on it. "Nice dog," Granger said. "What's her name?" "Scout," I replied, patting her on the head. But Scout stiffened. She seemed uneasy, ears perked in alarm. I was surprised. Usually she was friendly, sometimes over-friendly, with strangers. But she let out a low growl that I'd never heard before. Granger just laughed softly. "They get anxious in these parts," he said. "Wilderness can do that to an animal, especially if you aren't used to it." He tapped his walking stick on a rock. "Watch out for that deep pass to the north. Locals call it Devil's Pass for a reason." And that was the first I heard of Devil's Pass. I had glimpsed the name on an old Forest Service map, but it hadn't stood out. I asked what made it dangerous. He didn't elaborate. He just said, "Depends how you feel about bargains." Then excused himself, saying he had to make his camp before dark. When he left, Scout relaxed. My heart was pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. Something about the conversation, about the man, stuck with me. Even after he disappeared into the dusky woods, I kept expecting him to come back. But eventually, the stars came out, and we turned in. The next morning, my phone was dead. I had charged it fully the previous day using my solar charger, but now it refused to turn on. I assumed it was just some glitch. Maybe the battery had died from the cold night. Still, it bothered me. I tried hooking it up to the solar charger. The phone icon flickered but never gained power. The digital recorder, at least, still worked, though its battery indicator also seemed to have dropped faster than expected. I shrugged, figuring I'd done something wrong. I had enough sense to bring a physical map and compass, so I decided not to worry. I was out here to disconnect anyway. I decided to hike deeper into the canyon, making a loop that, according to my map, would bring me back to my car in about 10 days if I followed the main paths. Scout barked at me to hurry up, so we took off. About midday, it started raining. A cold, penetrating drizzle that seeped into every pore. My boots slipped on the wet rocks. Despite the rain, the air felt strangely electric, like the atmosphere before a lightning storm, though no thunder ever rolled. I made camp earlier than usual to avoid scaling slick terrain at night. As I tried to light a fire, the sparks refused to catch on the tinder. I had a stormproof lighter, so I was able to eventually coax a small flame, but the fire kept sputtering out. Even with dry kindling, it just didn't want to burn. When it finally did catch, it burned with a weirdly tinted glow, more green than orange. Maybe it was a reaction to the sap in the wood, or so I told myself at the time. That night, Scout whined incessantly, sometimes growling at the darkness. I slept restlessly, half expecting Granger to appear at the edge of my campsite again. He didn't, but I heard footsteps on the leaves, closer than comfort allowed. On day 5, everything seemed to go sideways at once. I woke to find my map crinkled and torn in places, almost as if it had been submerged in water. The ink was smudged, the routes barely readable. My GPS device, a small handheld unit, displayed an error message that just said loop and beeped randomly. It made no sense. I tried turning it off and on, removing the batteries, but it persisted in that glitchy loop. To top it off, the remnants of my freeze-dried meals looked spoiled, as if they had been left in the sun for days. Yet it had been cold during the night. I found black mold on a packet of beef jerky that had been sealed. The brand-new sleeping bag I'd been so proud of was unzipped from the inside, an impossible detail I tried to ignore. I pulled out my digital recorder to document my confusion. But as I played back the previous night's recording, 8 minutes of me rambling to myself about the day, it sounded like a full hour of audio, stuffed with strange whispers I didn't recognize. The phenomenon sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just an electronics malfunction. Anxiety, a glitch in the device, or some horrifying background noise that carried over from a weird signal. That excuse rang hollow even as I spoke it. Scout usually ate her share of dog food quickly, but she now sniffed it and turned away. I tried giving her some of my own rations, but she refused. She drank water at least, but remained restless, pacing around camp. At one point, she froze, ears pinned back, fur bristling. She stared at a random spot in the trees. No matter how much I tried to see what had her attention, I saw nothing. I kept moving, determined to stay on track. According to my map, I was supposed to find a small trail that led to Hat Point Lookout, an old fire tower with a 360-degree view of the canyon. It would be a perfect place to rest for a day. But the map's coordinates no longer matched what I was seeing, or else the terrain itself had changed. No matter how carefully I navigated, I ended up at the same charred stump, a lightning-struck tree that jutted out of the ground like a blackened fang. By the third loop, I was furious, cursing at the sky. That was when Granger showed up again, more abruptly than the first time. He seemed younger, or maybe just less hunched. The gray in his beard was now streaked with a healthy black. His skin glowed with color as if he'd spent a month in the sunshine. Scout's reaction was immediate. She bristled, hackles raised, lip curled back in a feral snarl. Normally, I'd hold her back, but I was so startled that I just stammered a greeting. Granger smiled. "You're going in circles, friend," he said. "Told you not to go near Devil's Pass." "I wasn't heading there. I'm trying to reach Hat Point." My voice sounded hoarse, like I'd been shouting or crying. "The map, everything's screwed up." "Happens in these parts, especially if you're not meant to be here." "Not meant to be here?" He shrugged. "We all have our roles, Jack. Some choose them, some don't. But you made a choice to come into my domain. Hearing him call it his domain made my skin crawl. "What are you talking about?" He just chuckled and said something I couldn't parse. "You already sense the loop. The trick is not to break it, but to pay the toll." There was something so matter-of-fact about the way he spoke, as if we were discussing a national park entrance fee. My heart hammered. I asked if he knew the way out, if he could guide me to Hat Point, or at least back to my car. He nodded. "Sure can, but it'll cost you something. These are old ways, old deals." He eyed Scout. That dog's got too much fear in her eyes. I felt a surge of protectiveness for Scout. What does that have to do with anything? Granger shrugged again, shifting his weight. "A simple exchange," he said with a disconcerting smile. "Give me the dog. I'll show you the path out. No time lost, no more confusion." My stomach turned. The offer was so absurd, so out of place that I thought maybe I'd misheard. "Are you out of your mind? I'd never give you Scout." He sighed. "You say that now. I'll let you think on it." He turned and walked away. Scout barked after him, her bark more like a strangled yelp of terror than the usual warning. By the time I followed, the man had disappeared, as if he'd stepped behind a tree and never re-emerged. That afternoon was one of the worst of my life. I hiked until my legs burned, pushing through brambles and thick undergrowth, desperate to find any sign of a man-made trail or a clearing. The clouds overhead boiled with dark, purplish shades that threatened lightning. Through it all, Scout acted anxious, whining and staring at me with a haunted expression, like she wanted to tell me something was terribly wrong. By dusk, I had to set up camp again without having found an exit. My phone was still dead. My GPS device still beeped loop. The digital recorder refused to power on at first, then sprang to life and displayed the date as something nonsense. February 14th, 1972. I shook it, tapped the side, and it changed to November 2033. This was either the worst glitch in the world or something else entirely. My mind whirled, coming up with no logical explanation. The next day, Scout disappeared. I'd woken up early to check my gear and try once more to make sense of the map. I realized after half an hour of fumbling with the compass that Scout wasn't there. My heart sank into panic. I called her name, no answer. I searched the perimeter of my campsite, no footprints, no drag marks, nothing. For the next few hours I searched further and further, calling out. I thought maybe she had chased some wildlife, or maybe she was disoriented. But my own sense of direction was shot, and I quickly discovered I could get lost simply going a few hundred yards off my route. Around midday, I found her collar lying near the edge of a steep cliff. No blood, no tracks, just her collar on the ground, as though she'd slipped out of it. My mind conjured a dozen horrific scenarios. Had she fallen off the ledge? I stared down the cliff, where jagged rocks and swirling rapids far below made me sick to my stomach. Tears pricked at my eyes. I called her name again, my voice echoing off canyon walls. No response, only the lonely hush of wind. I knew I should keep searching, but panic mixed with a powerful sense of dread. I began to imagine that I would find her body, broken at the bottom of the canyon. My stomach churned, and I sat on a rock to gather myself. Eventually, I forced myself back to camp, my rational mind telling me I might need to reorganize or mark my location before wandering. I felt lost, literally lost in the wilderness, but also psychologically unmoored. Without Scout, it was like losing my last anchor. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing her bark, faint and distorted, coming from different directions. Sometimes I heard her whimper, sometimes a bark that turned into an echoing human-like cry. Once, I even heard my own name, as if her bark was trying to pronounce it. It was impossible. Or maybe I was losing my mind. Towards dawn, I caught the faintest rustling outside my tent. My heart pounded. Then, a scratching noise. I unzipped the tent, rifle in hand, and stepped out. Nothing. No sign of an animal or person. The sky was in that strange pre-dawn gray, and the world felt surreal, shimmering. When I turned around, though, I saw that the side of my tent had been clawed at. Long, vertical tears. A few black hairs stuck to the edges. I tried to pick one up, but it disintegrated between my fingertips. At sunrise, Scout came back. I was boiling water for coffee, still shaky from the night when she trotted into the clearing. I couldn't believe my eyes. Her collar was still missing, but it was definitely Scout. She looked fine, physically, but something about the way she walked made me uneasy. She was too stiff, her gait slightly off. At first I was too relieved to care. I rushed over to her, hugging her, checking for injuries. She was cold to the touch despite it being morning. Her eyes looked different, cloudy, as if she were half blind. "Scout, girl, where did you go?" I asked, rubbing her muzzle. She stared at me, tongue lolling, tail wagging weakly, but she didn't bark. That tail wag was too slow, too forced. Still, I was grateful, tears welling up as I petted her. All day, I watched her warily. She didn't drink or eat. She sniffed the water bowl, but then turned away. She stayed by my side, occasionally turning her head to look at me as though she was studying me, not the other way around. Once or twice, I realized she hadn't blinked in a very long time, and when she finally did, it was mechanical. Snap shut, snap open. I tried to keep moving toward Hat Point, or at least away from that ominous loop, but by now the environment itself felt hostile. The trees seemed denser, darker. The wind carried half-heard voices, and the ground was littered with mushrooms I'd never seen before. Sickly, pale growths shaped like tiny hands. Worse, time acted strange. A day felt like an hour felt like a week. My watch consistently read 3:14 a.m. every time I checked, though the sun would be overhead. My hunger spiked, then vanished, as if my body couldn't keep track of its own needs. That evening, I considered the possibility that maybe the best plan was to trace my way back to the trailhead, give up on the longer journey, and drive back to civilization. But I had no idea which direction the car lay in anymore. My attempts at navigation led me in circles. The hills themselves felt new, changing. Scout was quiet that night, but around midnight, I heard her growling outside my tent. The growling was strangely human. It rose and fell in pitch like someone trying to mimic a dog. Fear iced through my veins. I clutched the rifle, called out her name. The growling ceased. Then I heard a voice that sounded like mine. Same timbre, same inflections, calling from a distance. "You'll be warm soon. You'll be warm soon." Repeated over and over, the same phrase echoing. I didn't sleep. The next day, I woke to find Scout sitting in the center of my campsite staring at me. She cocked her head, teeth bared in what looked like a parody of a grin. Then, in my own voice, she spoke a single word. "Jack!" I screamed and stumbled back, dropping the rifle. Dogs don't speak, not like that. Yet I'd heard it, clear as day. She stood up, tail erect, and stared at me. My heart hammered so hard I couldn't breathe. I snatched the rifle, aiming it at her. Could I really pull the trigger on my dog? No, this was some hallucination, maybe. I looked away, rubbed my eyes, and then looked back. She was gone. My mind spun. Was I completely unhinged? Hallucinations from dehydration? But I had water, not a ton, but enough. Could it be all in my head? The possibility that it might not be real was almost more terrifying because it meant my mind was fracturing. As I fumbled with the rifle, unsure what to do, I heard footsteps behind me. Granger stood there, arms folded, looking more robust than ever. His gray hair was now a blackish salt and pepper, his posture straighter, his face looking maybe late 40s at most. If I hadn't seen him earlier, I would have thought it was a different person. But those eyes were the same bright ones. "Morning, Jack," he said, voice as casual as if we were neighbors meeting at a mailbox. "It's a shame about your dog." "What the hell is happening?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Who are you?" He seemed amused, as though I'd asked a meaningless question. "Let's just say I've been here a very long time and I have certain powers over this place. The pass is a gateway and I guard it. People who wander here don't belong. If they want out, they make a deal. You want my dog. Why?" He gave me a calm, level look. "You love that animal, don't you? Perhaps more than you love yourself. That's why it matters. Sacrifice isn't sacrifice unless it hurts." I gritted my teeth, heart clenching. "She's not yours to take." Granger shrugged. "So it is." He glanced around, eyes gleaming. "But your time is running short. The loops tighten. The weather will turn soon. You can keep stumbling around or you can pay." He turned as if to leave, and a wave of desperation surged in me. I rushed forward, swinging the butt of my rifle like a club. It struck him across the shoulder, but he barely flinched, turning to face me with a lazy grin as if he'd let me do it. I screamed, swung again, but this time he simply wasn't there. Vanished into nothing. The echo of my own breath thundered in my ears. That night, I lost Scout for real. Or maybe I lost what remained of her. She returned at dusk, creeping up to me with that same stiff gait. I called out softly, unsure if it was truly her or that voice-stealing abomination. My next memory is hazy. A sudden blur of movement, a snarl, teeth at my face. We wrestled in the firelight, rolling over the rocky ground. I felt her jaws clamp around my arm, the pressure incredible, about to snap bone. The muzzle had some foul, cold slime around it. She tried to sink her teeth deeper. My survival instincts kicked in and I reached for the hatchet on my belt. I brought it down on her side once, twice, desperate to get her off me. She let out a noise that was half dog's whimper, half man's scream, then recoiled. Her skin seemed to slough off, turning to ash mid-air, drifting away in the wind. What remained was not a dog but a half-formed shadow, a shape twisting in on itself before dissolving into the ground. And then it was gone. Only the collar remained, battered and torn. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing uncontrollably, my arms shaking so badly I couldn't hold the hatchet. Blood dripped from my forearm, but the wound wasn't as deep as I'd feared. The emotional devastation was far worse. I'd killed my beloved companion, or some twisted version of her. I curled into the fetal position and screamed at the stars until I had no voice. The next day, I felt time fully unravel. I walked for hours or days, unsure. The sun seemed stuck overhead, then it would vanish, replaced by a pitch-black sky with no moon. My watch insisted it was 3:14 a.m., no matter how many times I tapped its face. At one point, I coughed up something and realized it was a tooth, but it didn't match my own teeth. It was too long, too sharp, and tinted black at the root. I discovered footprints around my campsite, barefoot prints that dwarfed my own shoe size, leading in circles. At times, I heard Granger's voice whispering in the wind, "You killed what you loved. That breaks the contract. Now you stay." Other times, the forest around me flickered, like an old film reel with frames missing. Maybe, on the day after that, or the same day, for all I knew, I saw Granger once more. He now looked positively vibrant, maybe in his late 30s. Hair more black than gray, his posture strong. I recognized his face, though it had changed so much it barely resembled the old man from before. I lunged for him with the hatchet, not in fear, but in furious revenge. He blurred sideways, but I managed a glancing blow on his shoulder. His form split open, like an empty suit, revealing black smoke and a vague red glow inside. He stumbled against a tree, half of his face pressed into the bark, yet still grinning, his eyes fixed on me. The smoke in his body rippled, and for a second I saw something in there. Something with horns and claws and eyes so bright they could have been miniature suns. Then his face reformed around that grin. He wasn't dead, not by a long shot, but he seemed momentarily weakened. I pushed my advantage, raising the hatchet again. Granger's lips parted, and a voice that wasn't quite his own erupted. "You can't kill me, Jack." Still, he sounded strained. Better to keep me sealed. I had no idea what he meant by sealed, but desperation made me reckless. I swung again, burying the hatchet into his left side. It felt like hitting dense putty. The wood behind him cracked, and the tree creaked as if it, too, was alive and feeling the blow. Granger's body half melted into the trunk, pinned there, eyes rolling back. He let out a low moan. In that moment, black liquid oozed from his mouth. I gagged at the stench, like rotten eggs and sulfur. The bark of the tree began to twist, enveloping him. Or he it. Slowly, the trunk seemed to close around his torso. His head emerged from the side, turned slightly upward, mouth parted in a silent laugh. His voice whispered, "I'll wait." Then all movement stopped. I stumbled back, chest heaving. My left hand felt numb. When I looked down, I saw that the skin of my palm was blackened, as though frostbitten. My nails had turned dark blue, veins bulging across the back of my hand. Pain shot through me, but I forced it down, focusing on the monstrosity pinned to the tree. The entire forest had fallen silent. I don't remember how long I wandered after that. My sense of direction was broken. My sense of time was non-existent. I recall forging through gullies and climbing ridges, half-starved, my arm throbbing, my hand stiff and useless. The water in my canteen tasted like rust. My freeze-dried food had rotted, but I forced some of it down anyway, spitting out black chunks that tasted of mold and decay. Sometimes I think I saw shapes in the distance, silhouettes of large humanoid figures, or something with twisted, antlered heads. Always out of reach. Always at the corner of my vision. Eventually, I collapsed near a trickle of a stream, my breath ragged. I tried to drink. The water was cold as ice, but it tasted bitter. I coughed, spat, drank again. My legs were trembling, my vision flickering in and out. I felt certain I would die there, another nameless victim of the canyon, and it felt strangely fitting. But I didn't die. I blacked out. I awoke in a hospital bed. The first thing I noticed was the beep of machines, the smell of antiseptic, the hum of fluorescent lights. My left hand was heavily bandaged, and a dull ache throbbed in my bones. I groggily opened my eyes to see shapes. Nurses, maybe, a ranger uniform, a doctor. They asked me all sorts of questions. My name, what day it was, who the president was, that sort of thing. My voice came out scratchy. I croaked, "Jack, Riley," and asked how I got there. A ranger told me they'd found me near a small tributary of the Snake River, severely dehydrated, malnourished, borderline hypothermic. I was missing for 43 days, apparently. I told them that was impossible. I'd only been out there for maybe 9 or 10 days at most. Their expressions said otherwise. They gently assured me my sense of time was off, that these things happen when people get lost. I asked about my dog, Scout. They exchanged looks. No dog had been found, no remains, no sign of her. I felt a wave of grief so intense that I nearly passed out again. They told me to rest, that everything would be okay. the gentle lie of civilization. In the days that followed, I learned how truly messed up I was. The blackened flesh on my left hand was some sort of severe frostbite or necrosis, complicated by infection. My hair had turned almost completely gray. I was 32, but my scalp belonged to someone decades older. Despite the best efforts of the hospital staff, my left hand remained partially paralyzed. I could move my fingers, but they felt like blocks of wood, unresponsive. A detective briefly questioned me about my disappearance. I offered half-truths, not wanting to mention devils and possessed dogs. I said I got lost, my phone died, I got turned around, and I might have hallucinated a lot. He seemed to accept that, or at least decided not to press the matter. They'd seen strange wilderness stories before, though maybe not quite like mine. When they finally let me leave, I returned to Seattle. I tried to put the entire ordeal behind me, but nightmares stalked me nightly. In those dreams, Scout looks at me with milky eyes, or Granger stands at the edge of a flickering campsite, younger every time, beckoning me forward. Sometimes I see that tree in the forest, and the trunk splits open, revealing Granger's face, mouth chanting, "I'll wait." The solar-powered recorder had apparently been found with me, though the device was cracked. The rangers said it wouldn't turn on. I brought it home, set it on a shelf, and tried ignoring it. But curiosity eventually pushed me to see if it had salvageable data. Sure enough, when I plugged it in, the screen flashed a jumbled date, February 14th, 1972, and then a few blinking files. I tried playing one. The track was over an hour long, though it was labeled Day 3, 8 minutes. My own voice started out calm, describing the weather, my location, Scout's playful mood. Then the tape devolved into weird static, voices overlapping. I heard Granger's voice, though I never recalled him speaking while I was recording. I heard Scout barking, growing more and more frantic, then a single long hiss that drowned everything out. All the hair on my arms stood up. I quickly turned it off, heart thumping. The rational part of me wanted to chalk it up to a corrupted file, but deep down, I knew better. It's been months since then. I've had physical therapy to regain partial use of my hand. My hair is still mostly gray. Sleep is a hellish ordeal, but I'm coping. I recorded a final message on a new device, an attempt at closure or confession, I'm not sure. I described the entire experience, speaking slowly, choosing my words carefully. At the end, I said, "He's still out there. He doesn't need your soul, just your choices." I guess that's all I can say. Be careful what you sacrifice, because you might just be making a bargain without knowing it. Late one night, I awoke in a cold sweat. The living room lights were flickering, and I heard a faint mechanical whir from somewhere in my apartment. Heart hammering, I followed the noise to my closet. Inside, I found the old digital recorder, powered on, blinking. Its screen displayed a single word, "Loop." I reached out, hand trembling, and the device began to play by itself. At first, I only heard static. Then, the distinct sound of dog tags jingling. A bark, a long, high-pitched whistle of wind, and a voice, my own, whispering, "You'll be warm soon." When it ended, the recorder beeped and shut off. I stood there, too scared to breathe. Then I noticed something else. On the top shelf, nestled behind some camping gear, lay Scout's collar, the one I'd last seen in the forest, pinned under her remains, the one I'd never brought back. I swallowed hard, tears filling my eyes. The collar looked the same, frayed at the edges, the tag scratched. But how the hell had it ended up here? I couldn't stand to touch it. Part of me wanted to burn it, but I was afraid of what might happen. Another part of me still clung to the irrational hope that Scout might somehow still be out there. Just a dog, no demon in her fur, wandering, lost and alone. But I knew the truth. I'd killed something that wore Scout skin, then watched it dissolve into ash. The real Scout was gone. So that's where I am now, trying to resume a semblance of normal life, carrying the nightmares in my head like a fungus. Some days are better than others. I sit in my small living room and record these confessions on a brand new voice recorder that I double-check every morning. So far, no bizarre time glitches. My phone works fine. My watch ticks away the seconds in a neat line. But I can't help but flinch whenever the lights flicker or a stray dog barks in the alley below. I can't help but wonder if I'll see Granger again, shining with youth, offering me some new, horrifying bargain. Maybe writing this down is pointless, or maybe it's an exorcism. I don't know. I only know what I saw out there, what I felt, and how deeply it's changed me. If you ever find yourself in Hell's Canyon, or near any remote wilderness where the trails run cold and the map fails, think carefully about what you're willing to lose. Because if you see an old man, or a young man, who calls himself Granger, if you smell sulfur on the wind, if your dog starts acting wrong, or if time slips away from you, run. There are worse fates than death in those mountains. That's it. That's my story. My name is Jack Riley, and I'm 32 years old. At least I was when this started. It happened in October of 2023, and no matter how many times I tell myself it's over, I know something lingers, waiting out there in the canyon. Or maybe waiting in me. Because once you've seen the loop, it leaves a door open in your mind. And sometimes, late at night, I can almost hear it creak. My name is Jack Withers. I'm 34 years old. This happened in August 2023, deep in the wilderness of Hell's Canyon, Idaho. I've run this story over in my mind so many times that I'm still not sure what was real and what was hallucination. Yet, every time I look at the scars on my shoulder, every time I flip through my shredded notebook, I know something truly happened out there. Something I survived, if you can call what I am now surviving. I'm not a soldier, not a veteran, not someone with special training in Black Ops or any of that. I'm just a freelance wildlife photographer who was going through a personal crisis. A messy divorce that left me raw, lonely, and uncertain if life was still worth living. I decided to throw myself into nature for a solid week. Photograph the deeper, more remote corners of Hell's Canyon. Clear my head. That was the plan. I took my German Shepherd, Boone, with me. Boone was 5 years old. Loyal, sharp, well-trained, and one of the few living beings I trusted. If you asked me 2 months ago, I'd have said that dog would sooner stop breathing than betray me, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Setting out. I arrived at the Hell's Canyon area during the second week of August. Even though it was well known as North America's deepest river gorge, I'd hiked only the more common trails in the past. This time, I wanted to explore areas rarely seen by human eyes. There were parts of that canyon rumored to be so rugged and inaccessible that no roads or standard trails could lead you there. That was exactly what I needed. Isolation so deep I couldn't hear the echoes of my old life. When I parked my dusty, beat-up Jeep at a makeshift pull-off, it was still early morning. The heat promised to be relentless later, but right then the crisp sun filtering through the pine trees was perfect. My phone still had a sliver of signal, so I sent a quick text to my ex-wife out of habit. I'm not even sure what I wanted to say. Something about how I was sorry for everything, how I was going into the wilderness and needed a break. But even that text wouldn't send. The signal was gone. I tried my GPS next. The screen flickered, froze, and then locked me out with some error I'd never seen before. It wasn't a cheap device, and I'd used it successfully on dozens of hikes. The fact that it suddenly refused to work annoyed me, but I chalked it up to a glitch. I had a physical map, though it was an older one, slightly out of date. I figured that combination of map, compass, and personal experience would be enough. Boone and I had done plenty of backcountry trips. Our routine was to rely on a mixture of tech and old-school reading of the terrain. Something in me whispered that I should maybe test the compass, and guess what? The needle spun like it was dancing. It would fix north, then jump 40 degrees for no reason. I told myself it was just the canyon's geology messing with the compass. Large mineral deposits can cause anomalies, I'd heard. It was an uneasy start, but the morning was too beautiful to let it scare me off. After all, I'd come here to face raw nature with minimal distractions. My phone's battery read 75%. Even if I had no signal, I could at least use it as a camera backup. Little did I know it'd be dead by the time I reached that cursed clearing. Into Hell's Canyon. The first day was uneventful, albeit physically grueling. I followed an old trail along the rim, snapping pictures of canyon vistas whenever possible. Boone trotted at my side, occasionally sprinting ahead to sniff out interesting scents. Usually he'd dash back with a wagging tail, excited to share his discovery, but this time he kept staring into the distance, ears pricked. I remember noticing a glint in his eyes that made me think he was on alert. He never barked, though. Just a low rumble in his throat, which I initially took to be excitement at the new environment. We set up camp near a rocky outcrop. The ground was sloped and the soil was dry. I fumbled a bit with the tent stakes, but eventually got them secure. My first real sign that something was off came after I got the fire started. I used a little twig bundle for kindling, like I usually do, but the flames flickered in strange shades, like the tips were tinged green and faintly blue. I'd seen that sometimes if you burn certain chemicals or sap. It was interesting, but not paranormal, so I shrugged it off. Later that night, though, I woke up freezing. My sleeping bag was unzipped. I distinctly remembered sealing it up because that's my habit. I don't sleep well if the bag's open. More unsettling, it wasn't just open, it was unzipped from the inside. Boone was outside the tent, whining quietly in the moonlight. That was odd. He usually slept at my feet. I assumed he just had to relieve himself in the night, so I patted the bag and told him to come back in. He refused. He just stared at me as if I were a stranger. The perfect clearing. By midday, on the second day, I'd gone deeper than I ever had before. The map was basically worthless. Landmarks didn't match, and the scale seemed off. I felt turned around, and not a single official or commonly used trail was in sight. My phone now sat at 5% battery. When I tried to open the camera app, the phone died entirely. That was when I came across it, a circular clearing in the forest, so perfect it looked designed. Grass in the center, an almost uniform circle of towering pines around the perimeter, and absolute silence. Not a single bird call, not even the buzz of a bug. It was like stepping into a vacuum. Boone trembled beside me. His hackles were raised along his spine. I wondered if maybe a mountain lion was in the vicinity, but I also felt the hush, the absolute quiet that made your ears ring. It was downright eerie. A part of me wanted to retreat, but then I noticed how flat the ground was. It'd make an ideal campsite. My shoulders ached from carrying the pack, so I thought, why not make camp here? It's as good a spot as any. I pitched the tent and gave Boone some water. He drank reluctantly, still glancing around in short, jerky movements. By the time I lit a small fire, again tinted with those odd colors, the sun was dipping low. The clearing's beauty was mesmerizing as the last light turned the ring of pines into tall, shifting silhouettes. I told myself I was lucky to have found a spot like this for photography. It was everything I needed. pristine, remote, and untainted by the usual tourist footprints. Then, in that hush, I saw him for the first time. Standing just at the edge of the tree line was a man. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Boone went ballistic, barking and snarling in a way I'd never seen before. The man, a silhouette against the dark trunk, didn't move at first. I shouted a greeting, something about how I didn't expect to see anyone else out here. Finally, he stepped forward into the firelight. He was tall, maybe 6'1", wearing a crisp, seemingly spotless hiking outfit. His hair was neatly trimmed, face clean-shaven, and he held a metal canteen that reflected the flames. He looked far too tidy to have wandered as deep as I had. He introduced himself as Lucian. His voice was calm, polite. He asked if he could share my fire for the evening. A wise part of me said no, but politeness overruled. This was a public land, and turning someone away in the wilderness felt rude. Besides, if he was out here alone, maybe we could watch each other's backs. Boone refused to calm down. He stayed at my side, fur raised, lips curled. Eventually, Lucian eased himself down, rummaged in his pack, and pulled out a small tin cup. He poured water from his canteen into it, offered me some, and I politely declined. Something just felt off. His canteen looked brand new, no dents, no scratches. That might sound trivial, but real wilderness travelers have gear that shows wear, scuffs, scrapes, something. Lucian started chatting like we were old acquaintances. He asked a lot of questions about me, where I was from, whether I was out here on a personal journey, that sort of thing. He seemed almost too invested in my answers, as if memorizing every detail. At one point, I told him about my photography, and his eyes sparkled. He said he loved capturing truth with a camera. I remember that phrasing, capturing truth. It resonated with something primal in me, though I didn't know why. As the night wore on, Boone wouldn't relax. He circled us, never letting Lucian out of his sight. Finally, I decided to turn in. Lucian said he'd just stay up a little longer. He seemed unfazed by the cold or by the unnatural quiet. I crawled into my sleeping bag, exhaustion taking over, and heard Boone's low growl outside. Lucien's vanishing act. The next morning, Lucien was gone without a trace. No footprints, no sign of a second campsite, absolutely nothing. Boone seemed relieved, but for me, that relief quickly turned to a knot in my stomach. I searched the perimeter, calling Lucien's name, expecting to find some sign of where he'd slept. Nothing. Even the grass looked undisturbed. Feeling uneasy, I packed up and decided I'd continue deeper in, using the faint ridgelines for reference. Boone and I trudged through thick vegetation, pushing until well past midday. That's when everything started going truly wrong. First, my sense of direction betrayed me. I walked in what I thought was a steady path north, but after hours of climbing and descending small rises, I wound up in the exact same clearing, the same perfect ring of grass. I recognized the layout and even the ashes from last night's fire. Only the ashes looked older, as if a week had passed instead of a day. I tried not to panic. I carefully took out my map, found where I thought the clearing might be, and plotted a new route west. The sun had already started its descent, so I wanted to hurry. Boone and I left again. We followed a creek. Rationally, if you follow a creek, you'll eventually find a main river or break out of the canyon. That plan, however, led us in a loop. Twice. My internal compass told me we should be heading west, but each time we'd come around, we'd find ourselves approaching that same clearing from different angles. It was like the forest rearranged itself when we weren't looking. That night, I was forced to camp in the clearing again. My phone was dead, the GPS still frozen, and the real compass just spun uselessly. Boone paced around me. At one point, he sprinted off into the trees, chasing something I couldn't see. He disappeared for half an hour. When he finally came back, he was shaking, and his front paws were slick with mud or some dark liquid. I tried to examine it, but it stank like something rotten. I wiped it off with a rag and cursed under my breath. The fire burned again in bizarre colors: purple, green, blue. Sparks danced upward, swirling as if caught in a strange wind that only existed within the clearing. I tried not to stare too long. I was afraid I'd see shapes in them. I must have dozed off around midnight. I had dreams of my ex-wife, Stephanie, standing in the clearing, cradling a dead baby I'd never seen before. She opened her mouth to speak, but only flies came out. Day 3. Time breaks. On the third morning in that clearing, time seemed to lose all sense. I'd check my watch, see it read 6:02 a.m., then glance again after what felt like an hour, only to see 6:01 a.m. or 6:03 p.m. The sunlight itself flickered. The shadows of the pine trees would lengthen, then shrink, then lengthen again in the span of minutes. I began to feel trapped, the kind of claustrophobia that has nothing to do with closed spaces but with the sense that the world itself has locked you in a cage. Boone vanished again late that morning. I called for him, whistled, hiked a short distance in each direction. It was hopeless. My map was nonsense, and I didn't want to get more lost. By noon, still no sign of him. My chest squeezed with worry. Boone was my lifeline out here, the one living soul I trusted. If I lost him, I'd lose my last shred of sanity. I debated leaving a note in the clearing, but who was I leaving it for? Lucian? Or was it for myself, in case this place made me forget who I was? Several hours later, Boone came back. He just walked out of the trees, tongue lolling as though nothing had happened. I knelt down to inspect him. His fur smelled burnt, and there was a singed patch near his hind legs. The weirdest thing was the way he moved, like each step was an afterthought, and his eyes wouldn't meet mine. Whenever I tried to pet him, he pulled away. He had this habit of blinking one eye at a time. I wrote it off to exhaustion or dehydration, so I offered him water, but he didn't touch it. Afternoon dread. Hungry, disoriented, and unsettled, I forced down a protein bar. The taste was rancid. I checked the date on the wrapper, still months before the expiration, yet it tasted like it had turned to mold and rot. I spat most of it out. My water supply was still okay, but I knew I couldn't keep eating rotting food. When I checked my pack, the rest of my food had the same foul odor. Hardtack, jerky, all spoiled, or so it seemed. It didn't make sense. These were sealed, long-lasting items, yet all of them reeked. Then I noticed my camera. The lens was cracked in a jagged line as if struck by a rock. I had carried it carefully the whole time. It shouldn't have been damaged. I tested the power button. It wouldn't switch on. Everything that connected me to my work, my identity, was failing. It felt personal, like the place or something in it was destroying each anchor of my sanity, one by one. Boone started licking his paws in a slow, repetitive motion. It was almost robotic, like he had no choice. I felt a spike of fear that he might be poisoned or infected. He barely glanced up at me when I called his name. Something was terribly wrong with him. As the afternoon wore on, I realized I hadn't eaten anything substantial all day. My stomach growled, but every attempt to consume my supplies was met with a revolting taste. Finally, I managed to scavenge some wild berries from the edge of the clearing, something I recognized as safe to eat. But even those tasted stale, as if I were biting into dust. Sunset came unnaturally fast. The clearing darkened in a matter of moments. I tried to gather extra firewood, stumbling around the ring of pines until I found some fallen branches. I must have been out there only 15 minutes, but by the time I returned, the clearing was pitch black, and my watch read 1:47 a.m. I was losing entire hours, or gaining them. It made no sense. Boone's transformation. Something rustled near the tent. I heard it before I saw anything. A wet, sloppy sound like jaws working on flesh. In the dancing glow of the sickly fire, I saw Boone hunched over something unrecognizable, ripping at it. Steam rose from the mass in the cool night air. My heart seized as I inched closer. It looked like a deer carcass, half rotted, but parts of it were bizarrely fresh. Boone stared at me, blood and fluids clinging to his muzzle. His eyes reflected the flames in an uncanny gleam. I whispered his name, and for a moment I caught a flicker of confusion in his gaze, like he was trying to remember me. Then it was gone, replaced by an alien coldness. He went back to devouring the carcass. I backed away, trembling. I had no illusions about my dog turning wild, but I'd never seen him behave like that. I tried to get some sleep, but every snap of a branch, every rustle, made me sit upright. Eventually, I gave up and just watched the fire's bizarre colors shift. My mind drifted to Lucian. Had I really met him, or was that a hallucination? And if he was real, why had he vanished so suddenly? Sometime in the early hours, I saw something shining in the grass at the edge of the clearing. I crept over, fear hammering in my throat. It was a stack of old Polaroid photos. The top one showed a group of smiling hikers, probably from the 1970s, judging by the clothes. Flipping through them, I found image after image of people I'd never seen, each photo more recent. Some looked as fresh as if they'd been taken yesterday. The second-to-last Polaroid chilled me to the core. It showed a German shepherd pinned to the ground by a faceless figure, mid-skinning. The dog's eyes were wide, alive, looking straight into the camera. It could have been Boone. The last photo was blank. I dropped them all in horror and stumbled back. Fourth day, helplessness. Morning came without warning. No gentle sunrise, just instant daylight. I squinted at my watch, which now read 10:15 a.m. The wind had picked up, swirling dust in the clearing. I crawled from the tent, legs cramped and stiff. Boone was nowhere to be seen. Desperate to break free, I picked a direction again and walked. My plan was to follow the slope downhill, eventually hitting a river or road. What should have been a 3-hour descent turned into a nightmare. Branches snapped behind me. At times, I swore I saw Boone or a figure sprinting through the trees to my left or right. I found streams that led me in circles. I discovered an abandoned campsite with gear rotted through, tent half collapsed. Inside were old cans of food from brands I didn't recognize. No matter how far I walked, I ended up back in that clearing by nightfall. My ankles throbbed, shoulders burned from the heavy pack. I'd lost track of time beyond what my malfunctioning watch said. Even the sun's position felt nonsensical, crossing the sky in abrupt arcs. I was delirious, near tears. I dropped my pack on the ground and dug around for something, anything, to help me. That's when I noticed my entire stock of food was missing, not even spoiled. Just gone. My water supply was half empty, though I remembered not drinking that much. A sudden panic overcame me. I rummaged, heart pounding, only to find muddy paw prints inside my pack. Boone's paw prints. He'd taken my food. That night, I tried to burn wet leaves to create more smoke, hoping it might signal someone. The smoke was purple, swirling in an unnatural pattern. Despite the dryness all around, it refused to rise straight up. It curled and twisted as though alive, forming shapes in the air that suggested faces, eyes. I coughed, tears streaming from the acrid fumes, and collapsed onto the grass. I dreamt of Lucian leaning over me, whispering soothing words. He told me I could let go, that I could embrace what waited in the darkness if I was tired of fighting. In the dream, I almost reached out to him. Fifth day, Boone returns wrong. I woke with the dawn, starving, throat parched. A faint hope stirred. Maybe Boone would reappear, but I feared what I'd see if he did. I spent hours wandering the perimeter, calling his name in a ragged voice that hardly felt like my own. Eventually, I heard rustling behind me. I spun around, and there he was, walking into the clearing with that unnerving gait. Head slightly tilted, one ear half flattened. "Boone?" I called softly. He turned his head slowly, blinking, first the left eye, then the right. His fur around the mouth was stained dark, even after he'd presumably cleaned it. When I tried to pet him, he let out a low growl. I retracted my hand. Seeing my longtime companion in that state was worse than facing a snarling wild animal. I wanted to help him, but I didn't know how. He smelled foul, like burnt hair mixed with rotting meat. I noticed something had changed. His collar was missing, but I saw no scratch marks indicating he'd slipped it. It was just gone. The tags, the bright orange band, everything. Another piece of normalcy erased. Around midday, I decided I couldn't linger. I had to move, possessed dog or not. Staying in this cursed clearing was suicidal. I marched in a new direction, heading east this time, purely because I hadn't tried east yet. Boone followed me silently, always a few paces behind, occasionally baring teeth at shadows. We traversed steep inclines, forging through thick vegetation. Strangely enough, the forest seemed to grow darker, as if the day was running ahead of schedule. At one point, I saw something in the undergrowth, what looked like a partial human skeleton, mostly hidden by moss and twisted roots. The bones had scratch marks. My stomach roiled, and I picked up the pace. A scream rang out. It sounded like a woman or a child. I froze, every hair on my neck standing up. I yelled out a greeting, but the echo just vanished. No answer. Boone let out a strangled yelp, and I saw him snap at the air as if fighting off an invisible attacker. Then it was over. Silence. Encounter with Lucian again. We eventually broke through a line of pines into a narrower clearing. My heart sank. It was the same circular shape, but smaller. At the far side stood Lucian, leaning against a charred tree. He waved casually, as though we were old friends passing on a Sunday stroll. Boone rushed forward, snarling. Lucian snapped his fingers once, and Boone stopped dead in his tracks. In that moment, I felt a cold sweat break out over my entire body. Lucian strode toward me, calm as ever, canteen in hand. "You look tired, Jack," he said. His voice was velvet, thirsty. I stared at him. My lips were cracked, my mouth was cotton. I hated the part of me that actually wanted a drink from that canteen. Something in his expression told me he was both aware of my desperation and mocking it. "What do you want?" I croaked, forcing my voice to remain steady. He shrugged. "Oh, I want many things, but right now I'm just here for you." Boone whined, tail low. Then Lucian looked down at him almost fondly. "He's been a good little messenger, hasn't he? Brought me your fear when he returned last time." Anger flared. "What the hell are you talking about? Leave my dog alone." Lucian's lips curved in a condescending smile. "Haven't you realized what's happening yet? This clearing," he gestured around. "It's special, a wound in the world. You stepped into it willingly, carrying all that guilt, all that anger and sadness. It feeds on you. I feed on you." I glanced around, noticing how the grass in this clearing was scorched in patches, as though an unseen fire had flicked across it. Smoke drifted from the ground at odd intervals. Lucian lifted his canteen. "Last chance. Drink. Let it all go. Every cell in my body wanted that water. I had no illusions that it was normal water, though. With trembling hands, I reached out, then flung my arm forward, knocking the canteen away. It clattered onto the scorched grass, water gurgling out in a dark, viscous puddle. A flicker of annoyance crossed Lucien's face. "Very well," he said quietly. "You chose this." He took a step toward me, his eyes glowing like embers. Boone howled, an agonized, unnatural cry. The dog collapsed, convulsing. I lunged for my pack, rummaging for my hunting knife, as Lucien reached me in 2 strides. He grabbed my wrist with inhuman strength, twisting until I felt something pop in my shoulder. "You wanted solitude," he hissed. "You wanted to run away from the fight with your wife, from your own guilt. Don't you understand? This place is perfect for people like you, people who want to be alone with their regrets. We always say the devil finds work for idle hands, but sometimes the devil finds a wounded soul in the wilderness." My vision blurred with pain. I tried to wrench free. He let me go so suddenly I nearly fell over. He stood above me, a towering silhouette with glowing eyes. The black puddle from the spilled canteen spread across the ground, creeping like a living shadow. Time stretched, the sky flickered, and I saw the sun shoot from midday brightness to near twilight. Boone lay on his side, whimpering. I scrambled over to him, pulling out my knife. He bared his teeth at me, confusion in his gaze. My mind shouted that if the dog attacked, I might have to defend myself. But an even bigger part of me prayed I could save him somehow. Lucien gave a dramatic sigh. "This is what your love has led to. Look at him, struggling between your bond and what I've shown him. It's too late. Now, if you won't take my gift, I'll have to take what I need by force." The violent struggle. Before I could react, Lucien lunged. With a desperate cry, I slashed out with the knife. I felt it connect with something solid. His arm or torso, I couldn't tell. He stumbled. A dark substance staining his shirt. It wasn't red, but rather a thick, black liquid mixed with swirling motes of light. I blinked in shock. In that second, he let out a guttural sound, more animal than human, and yanked me forward by my injured shoulder. Stars exploded behind my eyes from the pain. Boone, as if roused by my agony, sprang up and sank his teeth into Lucien's leg. Lucien roared, slamming Boone aside with a force that sent him crashing into a tree trunk. The snap of bone made my stomach lurch. I wanted to scream, but fury overtook me first. I drove the knife at Lucien's chest, barely missing his heart. He retaliated by swinging his arm so hard it knocked the wind out of me. I tumbled onto the scorched grass, breathless. "Fool," Lucien spat. "Do you even realize what you're doing? You're in my world now." I crawled toward Boone, who lay panting. One back leg twisted at a hideous angle. My eyes stung with tears. Blood oozed from a wound on the dog's side. I pressed my hand there, trying to staunch it. Boone whined weakly. In the corner of my vision, Lucien towered over us. Darkness radiating off him like a shadow made flesh. "You could have left your pain behind," Lucien murmured. "But now I'll claim both of you." That was the moment I realized I might die here. Something in me snapped. Instead of giving up, I forced myself to stand, ignoring the throbbing in my shoulder. Gripping the knife in my good hand, I stared back at Lucien. "I won't let you have him," I said, voice hoarse. "I won't let you have either of us." He smirked, stepping forward. Then, in a flash, I lunged again, aiming lower. The blade sank into the center of his torso, where I assumed a human's diaphragm would be. He let out a strangled cry, eyes going wide. Black fluid poured out, shimmering with flecks of light. His face contorted in rage and pain. I twisted the knife. "Go to hell!" I snarled. Lucien let out an unearthly shriek, the sound reverberating in the air. The entire clearing shook, pine trees rattling. The ground under us quaked as if the earth itself wanted to reject this monstrous entity. Time blinked, day to night, night to day, over and over in rapid pulses. I clung to the knife, refusing to let go. With one last roar, Lucian jerked backward, pulling himself off the blade. He stumbled, clutching at his gaping wound, black fluid steaming in the air. His form flickered. One moment he was the clean-shaven hiker, the next a towering shape with curved horns and ragged, leathery skin. My mind struggled to comprehend it. Then he collapsed to his knees, gasping. The shadows around us swirled closer. I thought he might vanish, but he remained there, pinned, a bleeding monstrosity. Boone whimpered, trying to drag himself away. I rushed to him, ignoring Lucian for the moment. Using my torn shirt to bandage the dog's side, my eyes flicked back and forth, not sure if Lucian was done for. He coughed, black mist curling from his mouth. "This isn't finished," he rasped. "You can't escape me here." Yet, I could see the knife wound had diminished him. He was still terribly dangerous, but something about that final stab had broken his hold on the clearing's illusions. My chance to get away. Desperate flight. I hoisted Boone into my arms as carefully as I could, ignoring the agony that ripped through my shoulder. Every step was torture, but adrenaline drove me forward. I limped toward the tree line, half expecting an invisible barrier to hold me back. Instead, I slipped between the pines unimpeded. Behind me, I heard Lucian's ragged breathing, then a growl of frustration. The trees blurred as I pressed onward, heart thundering. I no longer recognized the path. Everything seemed distorted, as if the forest was shifting. But the illusions felt weaker, thin. Maybe injuring Lucian had wounded the place itself. Time seemed to stutter. 1 minute it was bright daylight, another twilight. I just kept moving, one foot after another, cradling Boone. He weighed a ton in my trembling arms, but I refused to set him down. We navigated a slope, sliding on loose soil. I lost count of how many times I nearly fell. Eventually, I found a faint game trail, followed it. My watch read random numbers, so I didn't bother checking it. After what might have been hours or days, I saw a break in the trees and recognized a silhouette. An old ranger station. It looked abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the door hung askew. But that man-made structure felt like salvation. I staggered inside. The interior was musty, filled with dust motes swirling in beams of dying sunlight. The radio equipment was ancient, the battery long gone. A coat rack still held a threadbare ranger's jacket. I set Boone down gently, my arms burning with fatigue. He lay panting, each breath rattling. A wave of dread swallowed me. I wasn't sure he'd make it. I found a dented metal basin, filled it with water from a battered canteen I discovered under a desk. Miraculously, it smelled okay. I let Boone drink what he could. His eyes were still glazed, and he emitted small whines of pain. I pressed my forehead to his muzzle, whispering apologies. Flickers of salvation. I couldn't find any medical supplies, so I tore strips of fabric from a rotted curtain, bandaged Boone's leg, tried to set it as best I could. My own shoulder felt like it was on fire, but I forced myself to stay alert. If Lucian followed us, I'd have to be ready. A battered field telephone sat on a desk, an ancient device with a crank and a wire that presumably led outside to a bigger line. In desperation, I fiddled with it. To my shock, I managed to get a faint dial tone, like hearing ghosts. I didn't know if it would work, but I spun the crank, shouted into the mouthpiece, "Help! Is anyone listening?" For a moment, all I heard was static. Then, unbelievably, a human voice crackled back, "This is..." The transmission was garbled. Hear you?" "Please," I screamed. "I'm in a ranger station. We need immediate help. My dog is hurt. I'm injured. Something attacked us." I half expected the line to die. Instead, the voice became clearer. "Which station? Over." I had no idea. I glanced around, found a chipped wooden plaque on the wall. I think it's the old Dry Creek station, maybe. Hell's Canyon." There was a long pause. "Understood. We'll do our best. Hang on. Over." I nearly wept with relief. Maybe, just maybe, I'd found a lifeline out of this hell. I wrapped Boone in an old blanket, ignoring the rancid smell of the fabric. He licked my hand weakly, a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. I gently smoothed the fur on his head. Time lost meaning again. I drifted in and out of delirious half-sleep, slumped against the desk. Every time I jerked awake, I'd check on Boone. He was breathing, but shallowly. The station remained eerily quiet, except for the drip of water somewhere and the rustle of wind through gaps in the boards. A final nightmare. At some point, maybe a day or a few hours later, I heard a helicopter. The thumping of the blades resonated across the treetops. I stumbled outside, waving my arms. A rescue crew? I saw a shape overhead, bright lights scanning the forest below. Relief, warm and overpowering, rushed through me. I might actually get out alive. I collapsed on the steps of the station, tears streaming down my dust-caked face. The helicopter circled, then eventually hovered. 2 figures rappelled down, gear clanking. I tried to stand, but my legs failed. One figure rushed over to me. He looked like a paramedic, face etched with concern, mouth forming silent words I couldn't quite make out. The exhaustion and injury must have taken over. My consciousness winked out. When I came to, I was on a stretcher being loaded into the helicopter. Boone was on another. I could see him, unconscious but still breathing. I mouthed the dog's name. A paramedic gave me a thumbs up, indicating we'd both be okay. A wave of relief threatened to knock me out again. The next thing I remember was a hospital in Boise, blinking under fluorescent lights. A nurse told me I'd been severely dehydrated, that my shoulder was dislocated and infected. My body was covered in bruises, cuts, and insect bites. My dog had a broken leg, broken ribs, and a nasty wound, but was still alive. Days passed in a haze of pain meds. A police officer visited, wanting to know what happened. I gave some half-truth about getting lost, running into a dangerous man out there. I could tell he didn't fully believe me, but they'd found evidence of a struggle near the ranger station, including black stains that no one could identify. The official story would be that I was attacked by a deranged squatter or some cult-like figure. They didn't push too hard. Maybe they thought I was traumatized beyond reason. When they returned my personal effects, a partially shredded notebook, my cracked phone, and the battered hunting knife, something else was at the bottom of the bag. A single Polaroid photo. I almost screamed when I saw it. It was blank, just a square of white. But if I tilted it in the light, I swore I saw an outline of 2 forms. One of them unnaturally tall, the other a dog pinned to the ground. I quickly shoved it in a drawer. Aftermath and lingering dread. Boone survived his injuries. The vets said it was a miracle. He's never been the same, though. He startles easily, sometimes stares off into space for hours, blinking one eye at a time. But at least he wags his tail when I come home. That's something. As for me, I healed physically, somewhat. My shoulder will never be quite right. I have nightmares about that clearing, about Lucian's eyes glowing in the dark. I've tried to go back to normal life, even attempted some small photography gigs. But every time I set up my camera, I catch myself double-checking the lens, half expecting to see it cracked or to find impossible photos stored on the memory card. I've thought about searching for that clearing again to burn it down or find closure, but the rational side of me knows I'd probably never locate it. Or it would find me first. Sometimes I wake up late at night and hear a voice that sounds like Lucian's, whispering, "This isn't finished." Maybe he's still out there, bleeding darkness into the soil, waiting for me to drop my guard. Maybe I only escaped because the place, the phenomenon, decided to let me go. I truly don't know. One more thing. The rescue team reported it took them 3 days to reach me after that radio call. 3. But from my perspective, it was only a few hours between my frantic message and the helicopter's arrival. Another piece of time, lost or gained, that haunts me. I've tried to move on, but the lines on my map of Hell's Canyon draw my attention sometimes. There's a spot near the center where the lines blur, where the terrain forms a ring. I swear it's the clearing, but it's so faint that no official chart records it. Maybe that's for the best. If anyone else stumbles on it, they might not come out alive or sane. This is my final testimony, a warning to anyone who seeks ultimate solitude in the remote corners of the wilderness. Some places are wounds in the world, places where guilt and despair become gateways for something unspeakable. If you ever find yourself in a forest clearing so silent it makes your ears ring, turn around. Don't set up camp, don't linger, run, and hope it lets you go. I did, and I'm still not sure it truly did.